Every Sunday after church, somebody's mother pulled a warm pan out of the oven and the whole house smelled like brown sugar and butter. Nobody wrote those recipes down. They just lived in her hands, passed along at the counter while she poured the batter, and you stood there watching, learning without knowing it. But somewhere between frozen aisle convenience and fancy restaurant desserts, a whole generation of homemade sweets quietly disappeared. The ones made with a box of Jell-O, a can of crushed pineapple, and a tub of Cool Whip. The kind that showed up at every potluck, every church social, every family reunion, and then one day just stopped showing up altogether. Number 25. Number 25, dried apple stack cake. A woman in Perry County, Kentucky, would start this cake in the middle of September, the same week her apples came off the trees. She peeled the fruit, quartered it, threaded it on cotton string, and hung the string from the rafters of her back porch for 3 weeks until the pieces rattled like old leather. That is how she kept the taste of September alive all the way to Christmas. The cake itself was 6 thin layers, sometimes 7, each one more biscuit than cake. Flour, sorghum molasses, buttermilk, lard, 1 egg. She baked them in a cast iron skillet, one at a time, because she only owned the one skillet. Between each layer, she spread a dark, spiced paste of those dried apples, cooked down with water and a little sugar if she had it. The cake had to sit for 3 days before anybody was allowed to cut it. You do not rush a stacked cake, you wait for it. The folklore says a bride was counted popular by how many layers her neighbors brought, each woman walking up the path with a single thin round wrapped in a dish towel. Ella Mae's daughter had 11 layers at her wedding. Ella Mae cried for an hour. Let's start the video with everyone's favorite peach cobbler. Whether made with fresh, juicy peaches at the height of summer or canned peaches during the off-season, this dessert never failed to bring warmth to the table. Grandmas have always been great at making those labor-intensive meals, but this one was a laid-back treat that they whipped up in minutes. Yeah, even you can make it. Just take a few peaches, toss them with sugar and spices, and top with dollops of biscuit dough. This one was served best with a side of vanilla ice cream. Some grandmas even added a splash of bourbon to make the cobbler extra special. Plus, this dessert became so popular that there is even a day dedicated to it. April 13th is National Peach Cobbler Day in the United States, so mark your calendars and call your grandmas for some childhood nostalgia. Number 25. Banana pudding. Not the instant kind with a box of Jell-O mix and a tub of Cool Whip. The real one. Vanilla wafers layered with sliced bananas and a cooked custard made from scratch on the stovetop. Eggs, sugar, whole milk, a little flour, and a scrape of real vanilla. You built it in a glass baking dish, shingled the wafers like roof tiles, and let the whole thing sit in the icebox overnight so the cookies went soft and the custard set firm. By morning, it was one solid block of sweetness. At every 4th of July picnic I can remember, somebody's grandmother carried one of these across the yard with both hands, and nobody touched the store-bought cake once it hit the table. It was the dessert that told you the holiday had started. Japanese fruitcake was once the crown jewel of Southern Christmas tables, a towering confection that had nothing to do with Japan, but everything to do with American ingenuity. The name likely came from the exotic spices that reminded bakers of faraway lands. Each layer was different, one spiced with cinnamon and cloves and studded with raisins, another plain white for contrast. The filling was legendary, a cooked mixture of fresh coconut, pecans, and citrus that took hours to prepare. Grandmothers started baking weeks before Christmas, knowing flavors needed time to meld. The coconut filling spread thick between layers created a cake that was moist, complex, and unforgettable. Families guarded their recipes fiercely, each one slightly different depending on which aunt passed it down. Children watched the assembly with wide eyes, knowing that slicing into this cake meant Christmas had truly arrived. The poke cake looked like an ordinary white cake until you ran the handle of a wooden spoon straight down through it, punching holes every inch across the top. That was the whole trick, and if you had never seen it done, you would not have guessed. She mixed a packet of strawberry Jell-O with boiling water, let it cool just enough to stay liquid, and poured it slowly over the warm cake, watching it disappear into the holes and fan through the crumb. Jell-O promoted the recipe in the early 1970s, and it spread fast through neighborhood recipe boxes because it required no frosting skill, just a wooden spoon and patience. The Cool Whip crown went on cold. You could make it the afternoon before a party and forget it until the guests arrived. The first slice always surprised people who had never seen what was hiding inside. Nobody makes it anymore. No, ribbon candy was the crown jewel of every Christmas candy dish. Those impossibly thin strips of sugar pulled and folded into delicate waves that shimmered like stained glass. Making it required heating sugar syrup to precisely 300 degrees, then working quickly on marble slabs as the candy cooled just enough to handle. Skilled candy makers would stretch and fold the hot sugar, creating those signature ripples while incorporating festive colors of red, green, and white. The finished ribbons were fragile and beautiful, breaking with a satisfying snap that released bursts of peppermint or wintergreen. During the 1960s and 70s, specialty candy shops in every small town produced ribbon candy by hand, filling storefronts with dazzling displays. Families purchased pounds of it, arranging delicate pieces in crystal dishes that sat on coffee tables throughout the season. The skill required to make ribbon candy has nearly vanished, and today's mass-produced versions lack the ethereal thinness that made handmade ribbon candy special. Tipsy Parson is something that really is known for the waves it made in the 18th and 19th centuries. You have layers and layers of this nice, thick sponge cake, or occasionally pound cake, which gets drenched in all the sherry and bourbon it can soak up. Inside, there's a lovely custard filling that's to die for, making full use of all the best in-season fruits. It was something that got very popular in the antebellum South, since back then, using alcohol in food was something that was only reserved for those with big wallets. I guess it was something in the South Carolina or Georgia air back then that made people crave boozy food. These kinds of influences in cooking were common for the South, where honestly most of their food was known for its African and European influences. Plus, the fruits they would use for Tipsy Parsons were always in season in the South, so it became a regional specialty for them too. The name suits the dish though. It uses an incredible amount of alcohol to get the job done, and you definitely could get tipsy off of it. It never really tasted anything like brandy or whiskey though. I mean, if you really tried, you could get some faint notes, but it would be hidden under a lot of blackberries or strawberries, with biscuits squashed in the middle and a pretty heavy base. Ever thought of putting mayonnaise on a cake? Well, back in the day, chocolate mayonnaise cake was all the rage. Now, before you wrinkle your nose, hear me out. This cake came into existence when Mrs. Paul, the wife of a Hellmann's sales distributor, used Hellmann's mayonnaise instead of butter for her cake batter. Well, this cake is proof that accidents sometimes lead to beautiful or delicious things. Yep, it melts right into your mouth, thanks to an incredibly moist sponge. There were two famous versions of this mayo cake floating around. The first and older recipe was a chocolate cake with raisins and dates, and the other was just a regular two-layer chocolate cake with whatever frosting you like. This chocolatey goodness slipped away because adding mayonnaise to a cake started sounding a tad bit too bizarre. If you've got a jar of mayo lying around, you know what to whip up. Trust me, you won't taste a hint of mayonnaise in there. Magic cookie bars got their start from an Eagle brand recipe in the 60s and caught everyone's attention with their awesome taste and texture game. Imagine a buttery graham cracker crust layered with sweetened condensed milk, then piled with chocolate chips, butterscotch chips, coconut, and nuts. It's a chewy, gooey slice of heaven. They were a cinch to whip up and didn't need much time in the oven, which made them a hit for busy bakers and holiday times. Interestingly, they also go by the name Hello Dolly bars in some regions, adding a bit of theatrical flair to their homey appeal. But as years passed and people started leaning towards fresher and less processed goodies, the craze for these bars kind of fizzled. Usually they were cut into squares or bars, rocking a no-fuss, rustic vibe that made them super easy to serve and enjoy. The mix of sweetened condensed milk with coconut and chocolate created a taste that screamed 1970s home baking. Picture a rich, steamed Christmas pudding, dense with dried fruits such as raisins, currants, and sultanas soaked in brandy or rum. It is enhanced with suet for richness and bound by dark brown sugar, breadcrumbs, and flour. Ever wonder why Christmas pudding is strictly reserved for Yuletide feasts? Well, its roots trace back centuries to medieval England. It was a symbol of wealth and prosperity. In the 1970s, families anticipated the lighting of the Christmas pudding, eager to find hidden charms and coins for luck. But despite the charm, the hidden charms in this thick, overly sweet treat can cause dental issues, making it hit or miss. Remember those festive packages that came with snowy landscapes and carolers? They couldn't hide the fact that many hated the obligatory bite of this heavy, fruit-laden relic, so it's no surprise that this dessert is one we're happy to leave in the past. Speaking of thick foods, rice pudding falls right under that list. One of those was oatmeal and coconut cookies, which were famously known for being kept in iceboxes to preserve their flavor. Oatmeal cookies have already been something that Americans had a deep, intimate relationship with for a long time, even before the 20th century. And coconut was a largely inexpensive ingredient, so it's not a wonder to me that this dish found a new reason to be adopted by home chefs everywhere. Japanese fruitcake was once the crown jewel of Southern Christmas tables, a towering confection that had nothing to do with Japan, but everything to do with American ingenuity. The name likely came from the exotic spices that reminded bakers of faraway lands. Each layer was different, one spiced with cinnamon and cloves and studded with raisins, another plain white for contrast. The filling was legendary, a cooked mixture of fresh coconut, pecans, and citrus that took hours to prepare. Grandmothers started baking weeks before Christmas, knowing flavors needed time to meld. The coconut filling spread thick between layers created a cake that was moist, complex, and unforgettable. Families guarded their recipes fiercely, each one slightly different depending on which aunt passed it down. Children watched the assembly with wide eyes, knowing that slicing into this cake meant Christmas had truly arrived. Mincemeat pie was once the crown jewel of Thanksgiving, the kind of dessert that could stop you in your tracks because the house filled with the smell of spice, fruit, and something warm that felt older than memory. People forget that mincemeat was not just a pie. It was a ritual built slowly with dried apples, raisins, sweet, cloves, and whatever a family saved for the holiday. It was about turning humble ingredients into something that tasted like celebration even when times were thin. Grandmothers made it by instinct, each slice slightly different depending on the year's harvest. Kids wrinkled their noses at the idea of sweat, but one bite of that sticky, rich filling turned anyone into a believer. It demanded patience and trust in the old ways, which is why it faded once canned fillings and pre-made pies appeared. The world sped up, and mincemeat pie did not fit into a life lived in a hurry. Today, most people have never tasted it at all, but anyone who makes it from scratch understands why older generations fought to keep the recipe alive. Dense, spiced, comforting, and bold, it held on to tradition even as the world changed. Number 24. Sorghum molasses cookies. You have to understand something about sorghum to understand why these cookies existed. Sorghum is not molasses. Sorghum is the juice pressed out of a tall cane-like grass, boiled down in a flat pan over a wood fire until it turns the color of dark honey and tastes like a field at dusk. A gallon of it in 1962 cost $1.50 from the neighbor up the road who owned the mule and the press. A gallon of white sugar cost 4 times that at the store in town, and town was a 2-hour drive. So you used what you had. Mrs. Arlie Burgess in Clay County, West Virginia, made a tin full of sorghum cookies every Saturday for 51 years. Flour, lard, sorghum, soda, ginger, a pinch of salt. She rolled them thin as a dime and baked them on the stove. The children got 2 each after supper, but her grandchildren, grown now, still say they have never tasted anything sweeter. That is not an exaggeration. That is memory doing what memory does. Speaking of nostalgia, nothing brings back childhood memories of visiting Grams quite like some old-fashioned bread pudding. Every time there was stale bread on the counter, we knew Grandma was going to make some delicious bread pudding. This dessert became known as poor man's pudding because it was affordable. The best part about this one? You could add your own twist with toppings like raisins, chocolate chips, nuts, or fruit. While Grandma's bread pudding might have a classic American twist, this dish had international cousins. In France, it was known as pain perdu, which meant lost bread. In the UK, it was sometimes called bread and butter pudding. And in Mexico, there was a version called capirotada, which was traditionally eaten during Lent. Sadly, we're in the era of croissants and pastries, and this simple sweet treat can't compete with the fancies. Still, if you've got some bread, milk, and sugar at home, there's no better or easier way to use up the leftovers. Dust off your grandma's old cookbooks, and you might just find her exact secret recipe. Number 24. Pineapple upside-down cake. You melted butter and brown sugar in a cast iron skillet, laid down canned pineapple rings in a perfect circle, dropped a maraschino cherry in every hole, and poured yellow cake batter right on top. It baked for 40 minutes, and then came the moment that made every kid in the kitchen hold their breath. You flipped that skillet onto a plate in one fast motion. If you did it right, the caramelized sugar ran down the sides like amber glass. If you hesitated, half the pineapple stayed stuck to the pan. That flip was a performance. Women practiced it. They had opinions about the right pan, the right temperature, the exact second to turn. Nobody under 50 makes one anymore. Before I go any further, for the folks who want more recipes like these all in one place, I put together the Vintage Recipe Guide. It is a collection of the best old recipes I have come across. You can find it on my website, vintagelifestyleusa.com. The link is right below this video. I will not push it again. If you want it, it is there. Now back to the list. Burnt sugar cake carried a bittersweet sophistication that set it apart from other holiday desserts on 1950s tables. The caramelized sugar syrup flavoring both cake and frosting required patience, as sugar had to be cooked until almost black before being carefully diluted with hot water. This gave the cake its distinctive amber color and deep, complex flavor-balancing sweetness with an almost smoky undertone. Home bakers prized their burnt sugar skills, knowing the difference between perfect caramel and ruin was mere seconds. The frosting was equally challenging, a cooked caramel icing beaten at exactly the right temperature for smooth consistency. Served on cut glass cake stands, burnt sugar cake announced serious baking credentials. The flavor was unlike anything, rich without being cloying, sophisticated without pretension. It represented careful, time-intensive baking that modern convenience has largely erased from kitchens. But he turned on the oven. That was the point. She brought butter, sugar, cocoa, and milk to a rolling boil in a saucepan, watched the clock for 90 seconds exactly, not 80, not 100, and pulled it from the burner. Rolled oats went in, then a spoonful of peanut butter if she had it, then vanilla, and she dropped the mixture by spoonfuls onto waxed paper before it could set. You had 3 minutes before it stiffened. The cookies looked wrong when fresh, loose and shiny, almost wet, but inside 20 minutes they hardened into dense, fudgy rounds. In Midwestern church cookbooks from the 1950s, this recipe appeared as haystacks and preacher cookies. Boil it too long and the sugar made the batch grainy. Too short and they never set. She knew without a clock. Divinity was that cloud-like confection appearing on Christmas cookie trays throughout the South and Midwest, a fluffy white candy that seemed to melt on the tongue before you could taste it. Making Divinity required perfect timing and dry weather. Humidity could turn a batch into sticky failure. Grandmothers would boil sugar syrup while beating egg whites to stiff peaks, then slowly pour the hot syrup into the whites while continuing to beat until the mixture held its shape. The candy was dropped by spoonfuls onto waxed paper, each piece a little cloud dotted with chopped pecans. Some families added peppermint extract for Christmas, tinting batches pale pink or green. The process demanded patience that couldn't be rushed, often taking 30 minutes of continuous beating. Children would hover nearby, waiting to lick the beaters clean. Divinity was fragile and didn't travel well, making it a true homemade treasure. The candy represented the time and care that went into Christmas preparations. Speaking of more boozy food, did you ever wonder where the tradition of Jell-O shots started from? Well, by the 1990s, Everyone was getting drunk off of alcoholic gelatin, and people even started having themed Jell-O shots for different parties. For example, Christmas parties would have candy cane Jell-O shots, dressed up like the iconic candy canes you'd always associate with Christmas. Around the start of the 2000s, people actually started experimenting a lot with what they could do with Jell-O shots. They used different colored ones and associated flavors with themes, which worked because they really were trying to create Jell-O shots that looked and tasted great. It really took off in the late 2000s all over the nation, so there isn't a specific state where Jell-O shots were more or less loved. However, there is a certain phase of life with which you commonly associate Jell-O shots. There's been many stories of otherwise tame people having one too many Jell-O shots at a college party or bar and ending up with memorable incidents. Maybe that's what the supposed inventor Tom Lehrer intended anyway. It seems singers back then were even more known for partying than they are today, because apparently Tom would serve these up at his, and that's how he spread the idea. Most people thought they were a much more refreshing way to have shots, and that's probably what helped them keep their momentum well into the 2000s too. The Black Forest cake is a German masterpiece with layers of chocolate cake, tart cherries, whipped cream, and a healthy dose of Kirsch, cherry brandy for adults. This cake was a true showstopper at family gatherings, but it took more time than your average chocolate cake to make. The Germans don't come to play with their recipes. The star of the show has to be the alcoholic spirit that made the cherries sour, giving the cake its signature taste. Other spirits were also sometimes used, such as rum, which was common in Austrian recipes. Well, all good things come to an end, and so did his decadent dessert that has fallen out of favor, possibly because it takes a bit of effort to make. But if you ever get the chance to try it, you'll understand why it ever made it to our list. Napoleons, or millefeuilles, are these fancy pastries with layers of puff pastry and pastry cream, all topped off with this slick glazed icing. Originating from France in the 18th century and known for their 1,000 leaves, that's what millefeuille means, these pastries were a big hit in fancy bakeries for their classy look and delicate flavors, perfect for high-end events and fine dining spots. Making them was no small feat, though, and as lighter, simpler desserts became more popular recently, Napoleons started showing up less often. Usually, these pastries were served up in tidy rectangles, with the icing artfully done up to make them total eye candy. The super precise layers and that creamy, flaky vibe are what made munching on a Napoleon feel like a luxury. It's exactly what you think. It looks like something quite close to ice cream, but made with rice. So, what's the secret behind this creamy concoction? It all starts with a cup of rice, simmered in milk, until it reaches a heavenly consistency. Add a sprinkle of spice and a dash of sweetness, and you've got rice pudding. In the 1970s, families loved it as a budget-friendly meal, perfect for stretching ingredients. Its versatility made it a star in both sweet and savory dishes. But many found it bland and mushy, with a texture that could be likened to baby food. Its consistency and lack of flavor left many unimpressed and unsatisfied. Some of us really don't care if it was Grandma's favorite thing to make. We are happy to leave it right where it belongs, right there alongside mayonnaise cake. Wacky cake was known as depression cake, and it's not half as depressing as it actually sounds. It got that name, though, because it was everyone's idea on how to keep your sweet tooth in check and still get a cake somehow. Back then, the ingredients for cakes were just getting rarer and rarer. People had already given up on keeping stable supplies of flour and butter, but some couldn't even have eggs and milk on a regular basis. That's why this no-fuss cake that didn't take anything to make shine the way it did, and for something called depression cake, it sure put a smile on everyone's face. Burnt sugar cake carried a bittersweet sophistication that set it apart from other holiday desserts on 1950s tables. The caramelized sugar syrup flavoring both cake and frosting required patience, as sugar had to be cooked until almost black before being carefully diluted with hot water. This gave the cake its distinctive amber color and deep, complex flavor-balancing sweetness with an almost smoky undertone. Home bakers prized their burnt sugar skills, knowing the difference between perfect caramel and ruin was mere seconds. The frosting was equally challenging, a cooked caramel icing beaten at exactly the right temperature for smooth consistency. served on cut glass cake stands. Burnt sugar cake announced serious baking credentials. The flavor was unlike anything, rich without being cloying, sophisticated without pretension. It represented careful, time-intensive baking that modern convenience has largely erased from kitchens. Sweet potato custard was the quiet soul of Thanksgiving long before sweet potato pie stole the spotlight, a silky baked dish that tasted like home even in uncertain years. Families loved it because it was simple and comforting, made with sweet potatoes, milk, spices, and a steady hand. It came from an older style of cooking that relied on patience rather than tools. When it came from the oven, lightly set and fragrant, its sweetness came from the vegetable itself instead of handfuls of sugar. Adults swore it softened even the hardest winters, but as shortcuts and store-bought pies took over, the custard was pushed aside as too plain or old-fashioned. People forgot that its simplicity was exactly its charm. No crust, no excess, just a warm, velvety dessert that felt like a hug on a cold evening. Today it appears mostly in memories and fading recipe cards, but reviving it once is enough to understand why it mattered. Number 22. Sugar on cornbread with sweet milk. This was not a company dessert. This was what a child got when a child was loved and there was nothing else. A wedge of hot cornbread broken into a thick china bowl, a teaspoon of white sugar if it was a holiday, a drizzle of sorghum if it was not, a pour of warm cow's milk over the top, from the family cow, still faintly tasting of grass. The child ate it with a big spoon, sitting on a kitchen chair that was too tall, legs swinging. In Knott County, Kentucky, this was called cornbread and sweet milk. In Letcher County, they called it crumblings. In parts of West Virginia, they called it cornbread soakey. The name depended on the ridge. The feeling was the same. You do not forget the first time someone hands you something warm and sweet and tells you it is all for you. We've got all sorts of fancy pies nowadays, from chocolate hazelnut mousse to blackberry merlot, but Grandma's banana cream pie was the talk of the town in the 60s. Do you remember coming home to a chilly slice of this delicacy? This one was a guaranteed crowd pleaser, and that's why it was the star of the table during the holidays. Here's the thing. Bananas were very readily available in the US in the 1950s till 1960s, which means people had to come up with creative ways of eating them. And well, grandmas know best, especially when it comes to hearty desserts. The post-World War II era saw a boom in convenience foods and desserts that were easy to make at home, and banana cream pie fit perfectly into this trend. This wasn't just your favorite dessert. It was reportedly a favorite of President Harry S. Truman, who had a sweet tooth for simple, homey desserts. There was also a no-bake version of the banana cream pie, perfect for summer days when turning on the oven wasn't ideal. Number 23. Brown sugar fudge. This was the candy that sat on a paper plate next to the sparklers, and people grabbed a square every time they walked past. Brown sugar, evaporated milk, butter, and a pinch of salt. You boiled it to soft ball stage, pulled it off the heat, beat it with a wooden spoon until your arm burned, and poured it into a buttered pan. The texture was somewhere between caramel and praline. Grainy in a way that modern candy never is because nobody had a thermometer. You judged it by dropping a bead of syrup into cold water and pressing it between your fingers. If it held a ball, it was ready. If it fell apart, you boiled it longer. Every woman had her own threshold. In the fall of 1974, a month after Nixon resigned, a home cook in Hagerstown, Maryland named Christine Hatcher mixed pistachio pudding into white cake batter, covered the whole thing in green frosting hiding nuts underneath, and named it after the scandal. Because of all the nuts in it, she said. White cake mix, pistachio pudding, vegetable oil, club soda, eggs, and coconut flakes baked into a sage green bundt. The frosting was Cool Whip folded with more pistachio pudding, pale and sweet and hiding everything. When Jell-O launched its pistachio pudding mix in 1976, the cake became even easier to assemble. It showed up at every potluck that year, every church supper, every block party. A dessert that let people laugh at something they were still furious about. Today, most people have never heard of it. The cover-up worked. Date nut roll was that glossy cylinder wrapped in waxed paper appearing in refrigerators during December, a dense and chewy confection tasting like concentrated Christmas. The candy started with chopped dates cooked with sugar until thick, then mixed with butter, rice cereal, and mountains of chopped walnuts or pecans. While still warm, the mixture was shaped into logs, rolled in powdered sugar or coconut, then wrapped tightly and chilled until firm enough to slice into neat rounds. Each slice revealed a mosaic of nuts and golden dates, the texture somewhere between fudge and taffy. Department stores like Neiman Marcus became famous for holiday date nut rolls, but most families had cherished recipes passed down through generations. The rolls kept well for weeks, making them practical gifts prepared ahead of the holiday rush. Children often found them too sophisticated, leaving more for adults who savored their complex sweetness. Date nut rolls represented a time when Christmas candy meant more than chocolate. That's all for partying in well-off times, though, but if you go a little bit towards the past, namely the post-World War II era, you'll find that practical dishes like no-bake eggnog icebox cakes were a lot more popular. So, in case you don't know, they used to have ice boxes to keep things cold before refrigeration, as we know it became a thing. In the post-war era, there were still a lot of people who lived by rationing and making the best use of everything. You know, habits in wartime are hard to get rid of, right? These cakes became really popular because they used eggnog and were a convenience dessert. Plus, the tradition of icebox cakes was something that had been made really accessible to maintain. Thanks to companies like Nabisco, which continued to make their chocolate wafer cookies and popularized icebox cake recipes with those at the core, it just meant that everything you needed for it, you could buy. It was also a sign of how Americans would go towards food that was ready-made more than food that needed to be cooked from scratch. While it may not have the same attention to detail, it gets the job done pretty well since sometimes you just need good food that hits the spot. It doesn't have to be perfectly presented or made. These recipes came pretty close, though. No-bake treats were a lifesaver for busy families, and chocolate haystacks were a favorite. These little no-bake goodies were made with chow mein noodles and melted chocolate. Yep, you heard that right. These cookies are a product of the make do with what you have era. The crunchy noodles gave this dessert a unique texture that made it stand out from the rest. They were incredibly easy to make. Just melt the chocolate, mix in the noodles, and drop spoonfuls onto a baking sheet to set. The kids loved this one in the 90s, and they were a hit at parties and school events. These ones really need to make a grand re-entry, don't they? Back in the late 70s, Jell-O rolled out pudding pops, turning the frozen treat game on its head with something way creamier than the usual ice pops. Made from milk, sugar, and pudding mix, these pops were all about delivering a super smooth, rich taste. At their peak, pudding pops were so popular that they spawned a range of flavors, including chocolate, vanilla, and swirls. They totally stood out, thanks in part to those catchy Bill Cosby ads shouting, "Pudding in a pop." That marketing charm made these treats a big deal in households across the board. But even with their popularity, Kraft decided to cut them from the lineup in the early 2000s. They were trying to slim down their product range. The bright, fun packaging and that quirky non-wood stick are what a lot of folks remember about them. I don't know who thought this was a great idea, but mayonnaise cake combines creamy mayo with cake batter, promising a tender crumb and rich flavor. The cake is made by combining typical cake ingredients like flour, sugar, eggs, and cocoa powder. The twist comes with the addition of mayonnaise, which replaces the need for butter or oil, providing the necessary fats and moisture. The mayo is mixed with water and vanilla extract before being added to the dry ingredients. Homemakers loved it for its convenience and clever kitchen shortcut. Despite its moist texture, the idea of mayo in a cake was off-putting to many. Manufacturers marketed mayo as the secret to baking perfection, but let's be honest, the concept left a lot to be desired. While it's a nostalgic nod to culinary creativity, mayonnaise cake is one 70s dessert that most are happy to leave behind. Did anyone else's family try this unusual treat? No shades to the inventor, but I have the same feeling about mincemeat pie. Chocolate potato cakes were probably the best example of ingenuity as a result of a crisis. Who would have ever thought that mashed potatoes and chocolate could go together in a cake of all things? I couldn't come up with that with a gun to my head, and these people had bills to theirs instead, which is twice the pressure. If you look back into American cooking practices, though, using potatoes as a way to make the cake base more firm and dense was a common practice, and when other things like flour and thickening agents weren't available, this was due. Cocoa powder was also a lot easier to get than chocolate bars, so it took care of flavoring the cake pretty easily. One of the other rarer ways people got to baking cakes was to use potatoes as a base instead, and now you can probably see that I really wasn't exaggerating when I said that people used potatoes to get by. They made almost everything they could out of potatoes, and this cake used chocolate layers on top of a potato base to create a pretty comforting dessert that could pass around the entire family. Despite what you might think, the chocolate flavor was actually pretty noticeable and deep, and the potato flavor was barely noticeable. It felt and tasted much closer to a real cake than people would imagine. Speaking of things that are readily available and easily grown, I can't forget about apples and how much they helped in the 20th century. You could get them from local orchards, canned, and even in stores. They were still a slightly reasonable place. Lane cake originated in Alabama and reached peak popularity during the 1950s Christmas seasons when Southern hostesses competed to produce the most impressive version. The cake layers were simple white or yellow cake, but the filling was where ambition met tradition. Pecans, coconut, raisins, and maraschino cherries were folded into rich custard, then generously spiked with bourbon or brandy. Some recipes called for so much liquor the cake needed days to age, allowing the alcohol to mellow and permeate every layer. The frosting was fluffy, white-boiled icing providing contrast to the boozy, fruit-studded filling. Lane cake was not for children, and adults treated each slice as celebration. Baking one required confidence, as the custard could curdle if overcooked and boiled icing demanded precise timing. Those who mastered it earned reputations lasting decades. Their cakes requested year after year at family gatherings. Number 23, vinegar pie. Now here is one that will make a modern kitchen flinch. A cup of sugar, 3 tablespoons of flour, 2 eggs, a half cup of white vinegar, water, a pat of butter, 1 crust. That is the whole recipe. No fruit, no cream, no nuts. Just vinegar, cooked until it turns, somehow, into a pale gold custard that tastes a little like lemon pie and a little like nothing you have eaten before. It was a February pie. It was a winter pie. It was a pie you made in the second week of a long month when the fruit cellar was down to the last 3 jars of apple butter and you still wanted to put something sweet on the table for a cold Sunday supper. Women in the hollows of McDowell County, West Virginia, had this recipe memorized. They had to. They made it most weeks of January and February for the best part of a century. It fed 8 people for 9 cents. Many great things have come out of Alaska, but nothing beats the baked Alaska grandma would bring home on the weekends. If it doesn't ring a bell, let me jog up your memory really quickly. This dessert was made of ice cream placed in a pie dish, lined with slices of sponge cake or Christmas pudding, and topped with meringue. Now, don't let the name fool you. This delicacy didn't really originate in Alaska. Yeah, it was made at the famous Delmonico's restaurant in New York City. The dessert was supposedly named Alaska, Florida, in 1867 to celebrate the United States purchase of Alaska from Russia, with the cold ice cream representing Alaska and the warm, baked meringue representing the sunny state of Florida. This one is known for its dramatic presentation. It was brought to the table aflame with a flambe. Many grandmas love to make baked Alaska for special occasions because of its wow factor. Number 22. Peach cobbler. Not the crumble top version you see today. The real cobbler had a thick biscuit crust dropped in spoonfuls over sliced peaches, and you baked it until the dough puffed up golden and the fruit juice bubbled through the cracks. The peaches came from a tree in somebody's yard, picked a day too early so they would hold up to the heat. A little lemon juice, white sugar, a dusting of cinnamon, and nothing else. You served it hot in a bowl with a scoop of vanilla ice cream that started melting before it hit the fruit. Every church supper and backyard cookout from Virginia to East Texas had one of these on the table. It was never fancy. It was never supposed to be. That was the whole point. Lane cake originated in Alabama and reached peak popularity during the 1950s Christmas seasons when Southern hostesses competed to produce the most impressive version. The cake layers were simple white or yellow cake, but the filling was where ambition met tradition. Pecans, coconut, raisins, and maraschino cherries were folded into rich custard, then generously spiked with bourbon or brandy. Some recipes called for so much liquor the cake needed days to age, allowing the alcohol to mellow and permeate every layer. The frosting was fluffy, white-boiled icing providing contrast to the boozy, fruit-studded filling. Lane cake was not for children, and adults treated each slice as celebration. Baking one required confidence, as the custard could curdle if overcooked and boiled icing demanded precise timing. Those who mastered it earned reputations lasting decades. Their cakes requested year after year at family gatherings. Ella Rita Helfrich of Houston, Texas, took second place at the 1966 Pillsbury Bake-Off with a chocolate bundt cake that did something nobody could explain. Butter, sugar, eggs, flour, walnuts, and a packet of Jiffy Double Dutch fudge frosting mix went into the batter, and when it came out of the oven, the outside had set into a brownie dark crust while the center remained soft and fudgy, a tunnel of chocolate running through the entire ring. No filling was added. It formed itself. The nuts were structural. Without them, the tunnel collapsed. Pillsbury received so many requests that the recipe may have done more to popularize the Nordic ware bundt pan than any other single dish of the 1970s. By the 1990s, Pillsbury discontinued the frosting mix the recipe required. Home bakers spent years trying to replicate it with cocoa powder and powdered sugar. Some got close. The woman who invented it passed on long before the frosting mix did. Steamed plum pudding was the dramatic finale to Christmas dinner. That dark, dense dome carried flaming to the table with brandy blazing blue around its edges. Making one properly took weeks, starting with dried fruits soaked in brandy until they swelled with boozy sweetness. The batter combined sweet, real beef fat giving the pudding its distinctive richness, with breadcrumbs, flour, eggs, and pounds of currants, raisins, and candied peel. The mixture was packed into ceramic molds and steamed for hours until the kitchen filled with the scent of spices and spirits. Traditional families made their puddings on Stir-Up Sunday, 5 weeks before Christmas, allowing time for flavors to mature. The reheating on Christmas Day required several more hours of steaming before the grand presentation. Hard sauce, butter beaten with powdered sugar and brandy, melted into pools around each slice. The pudding was so rich that small portions satisfied, meaning one could serve the entire family. To the dawn of the 2000s, which brought a lot of new stuff with it using unfamiliar and familiar concepts. One of those was profiterole, whiskey, and maple trifles. Profiteroles themselves were just these cream-filled pastry puffs, which caught on within America when the country started to deeply explore French cuisine. They were one of the first kinds of choux pastries that you could find, which is the same kind of pastry they used to make eclairs and cream puffs. It was really common to see profiteroles in New Orleans, where the first French immigrants and settlers had made communities and waved their recipes into the culture of American eating. Those recipes never called for using trifles, though, which to some was sort of seen as an affront to tradition, but to most it was seen as a very fun way to get a trifle-based dish as a reliable option for a Saturday night dinner. This dessert had a lot of elegance to it, which made it perfect for outings with meaning or any kind of celebration. This maple version used whiskey and maple syrup, which gave it a very nostalgic flavor you definitely associate with American eating. It got really popular in Midwestern and Southern restaurants in the 2000s, and the dessert was amazing at working both whiskey and maple syrup into one neatly blended flavor. The chocolate icebox cake screams nostalgia like no other. This dessert was a staple for many families, especially during the hot summer months when turning on the oven was not an option. We're talking about layers of chocolate wafers and whipped cream stacked and chilled in the fridge. But the true magic happened when you let it sit in the icebox overnight. That's where the name comes from. The wafers absorbed the moisture from the cream, which almost gave it a cake-like texture without any baking. This one was a hit across the globe. Australia, Philippines, United Kingdom, America, you name it. Sadly, this one just went out of style, but I think the weather has really been calling for this one to make a comeback. Don't you think? Down in Greensboro, North Carolina, Mrs. L.H. Wiggins came up with the hummingbird cake, which Southern Living magazine made famous in '78. This cake's got it all: bananas, pineapple, pecans, cinnamon, and it's topped with a killer cream cheese frosting that ties all those spicy and fruity flavors together. It became a big deal fast, thanks to its unique taste combo and the fact that it was pretty easy to make for any kind of get-together. Over time, though, as dessert trends evolved and global flavors took the spotlight, the hummingbird cake kind of drifted out of the mainstream. The cake is particularly beloved in the South, where it remains a celebrated part of regional culinary traditions. Typically, this cake was stacked up high in layers and generously slathered with frosting, making it a showstopper at parties. It sounds like meat pie, but meat is not the star ingredient. Rather, it's made from spiced fruits and sweet, sometimes with a hint of meat. Historically, mincemeat pies trace their origins to medieval England and originally contained real meat. The preparation back then involved finely chopping beef or mutton and mixing it with a variety of dried fruits like raisins, currants, and apples, along with spices such as cinnamon, nutmeg, and cloves. Sweat, beef or mutton fat, was added for richness, and the mixture was soaked in brandy or another liquor to enhance the flavor. This blend was then left to mature, allowing the flavors to meld together before being encased in a pastry crust and baked. But by the '70s, the meat was mostly gone, but the name stuck. Who remembers those ads claiming these pies were just like grandma's? Some people may miss it, but we can all agree that the mixture was overly rich and oddly textured. Did anyone else ever wonder why this pie still lingers on holiday tables? Maybe it's time to leave this peculiar dessert in the past where it belongs. People made all sorts of dishes with apples, like apple walnut cakes with orange glazes. Now, at first sound, that might feel like a pretty odd mix of flavors, but just humor me for a second. Dried fruit like walnuts was foraged or purchased, since they also managed to escape the worst of the rising inflation. Foraging walnuts was a lot easier in areas where they were grown naturally, like California, so this cake took off with the crowd there. Floridians also used to get by on this cake a lot, so you can trust that you might find some use out of it too, especially if you're from those states. Back to the cake though, because there's a lot to talk about flavor-wise here. This cake used those and an orange glaze to make a really fruity cake overall that had a tangy, citrusy flavor profile, but a satisfying walnut crunch, along with the bitterness and sweetness of a nice, ripe apple. All in all, it's not a bad deal for the circumstances. Plus, in the guise of a cake, you were actually eating some pretty healthy fruits. The best thing about this cake was that it could stand on its own without any frosting or decor, and it could also be baked in one single pan. The glaze balanced the earthiness and bitterness of the walnuts, and the apples were right in the middle of the flavor spectrum, whereas the nuts and oranges were on opposite ends. This meant that you had a pretty well-balanced dish for almost no effort or money, and that was a godsend back then. Scripture cake was a beloved Christmas tradition that turned baking into a biblical treasure hunt, with each ingredient referenced by chapter and verse. Recipes listed items like Judges 5:25 for butter and Jeremiah 6:20 for sugar, requiring bakers to look up each passage in their family Bible. The result was typically a rich spice cake studded with figs, raisins, almonds, and honey, flavors evoking the ancient Holy Land. Sunday school classes and church groups baked scripture cakes together as holiday activities, combining religious education with kitchen skills. Mothers used the recipe to teach children both cooking techniques and biblical literacy in a single afternoon. The cakes were dense and aromatic, filled with warming spices of cinnamon, nutmeg, and cloves that filled kitchens with the smell of Christmas. Though the tradition has faded, scripture cake once represented how faith and food intertwined in American celebrations. Pumpkin chiffon pie was the lighter, softer cousin of the traditional pumpkin pie, a dessert so airy it felt like eating a sweet autumn cloud. It became popular when cooks wanted something elegant but not too heavy after a long day of holiday eating, and chiffon pies were considered the height of sophistication. Instead of the dense custard people are used to today, pumpkin chiffon pie relied on whipped egg whites, folded carefully into a spiced pumpkin mixture, creating a silky filling that floated inside its crust. Families loved it because it felt special, almost fancy, even when the ingredients were simple and inexpensive. Mothers would make it the night before Thanksgiving so it had time to set, and children would sneak into the refrigerator just to poke at the trembling surface. But when canned pumpkin fillings and pre-made pies started taking over in grocery stores, chiffon pies faded fast. The delicate preparation did not fit into a world rushing toward convenience. People forgot the feeling of lifting a slice that barely weighed anything, of tasting pumpkin in a way that felt light instead of heavy. The pie disappeared, replaced by versions that were simpler but far less magical. Still, anyone who ever tasted a homemade pumpkin chiffon pie will tell you that nothing has matched its airy charm since. In a holiday built on tradition, it remains one of the sweetest losses. Number 20. Peanut butter potato candy. Here is a candy that began as 2 ingredients and stayed that way for 80 years. 1 cold, boiled potato, 2 cups of powdered sugar worked in by hand until a white dough came together under your palms. You rolled it out thin on a floured board, spread peanut butter over the whole sheet, rolled it up like a jelly roll, cut it into coins, pinwheels of brown and white, sweet enough to set your teeth aching. A single potato, a 2-pound bag of sugar from the company store, and a jar of peanut butter made enough candy for a church social of 50. Mrs. Nora Lewis of Mingo County, West Virginia, made it every Christmas Eve from 1944 until 1989. Her grandchildren still fight over the recipe card. 4 lines long. One of them has it framed. Now, not all of us had a sweet tooth growing up, but you know grandmas, they had something for everyone. And lemon meringue pie was the dessert of our dreams. It wasn't too sugary, just the right balance of tart and sweet. The pie that we knew growing up was believed to have evolved from 2 earlier desserts, the lemon custard pie and meringue-topped desserts. The lemon meringue pie consisted of a shortened pastry base filled with lemon curd and topped with meringue. This dessert became all the rage during the Victorian era, which made it one of the luxury dessert options of the time. But you know how our grandmas loved spoiling us, and she was always ready to whip up labor-intensive meals as long as they brought a smile to our faces. Plus, this one was also one of the healthier desserts. Yeah, thanks to the lemon's vitamin C and the absence of heavy creams and custard. It doesn't really get better than this, does it? 21. Cherry pie with a lattice crust. Sour cherries, the kind you picked from a backyard tree and pitted by hand with a hairpin. You mixed them with sugar and a tablespoon of flour to thicken the juice, mounded them into a lard crust, and then you wove the lattice strips one by one across the top. It took 15 minutes just to do the weave. The pie baked until the filling showed through the gaps like stained glass, dark red and bubbling. The juice always ran over and burned on the bottom of the oven, and nobody cared. That burned sugar smell was part of the holiday. Cherry pickers sold buckets on the roadside in June so you could put up enough for the 4th. If your family did not have a tree, you knew someone who did. Nobody bought canned cherries for this pie. The dessert table was the real holiday. Not the burgers, not the corn on the cob. The dessert table was where the competition happened, where women measured each other without saying a word. You brought your best. You set it down between somebody else's pound cake and somebody else's icebox pie, and you watched. You watched who came back for seconds. You watched whose dish went home empty. Nobody kept score out loud, but everybody kept score. A compliment on your chess pie could carry you through August, and the women who brought store-bought were remembered for it, not with cruelty, but with a silence that said more. That table held 30 years of reputation. It was not about sugar. It was about showing up with something that proved you still cared enough to stand over a hot stove in July. Lady Baltimore cake was the grande dame of Southern Christmas baking. A towering white layer cake with filling so complex it required its own recipe card. The cake was delicate white, made with egg whites only, producing ethereal texture that melted on the tongue. The filling was the star, a boiled frosting mixed with chopped figs, raisins, pecans, and candied cherries, creating sweet and chewy contrast to the tender crumb. The entire cake was enrobed in more fluffy white frosting, creating pristine appearance belying the richness within. Named for the novel by Owen Wister, Lady Baltimore cake became synonymous with gracious Southern entertaining and elegant holiday gatherings. Hostesses began preparations days in advance, knowing multiple components required careful timing. Cutting the first slice revealed the treasure hidden inside, and guests would gasp at generous filling studded with dried fruits and nuts. And if the tunnel of fudge proved the kitchen could surprise you with chocolate, the Harvey Wallbanger cake proved it could do the same with a cocktail. The Harvey Wallbanger was a drink: vodka, orange juice, and a float of Galliano, the tall yellow Italian liqueur nobody bought for any other reason. And by the early 1970s, it was the fashionable order at every bar worth visiting. A 1972 cooking booklet included with a Sunbeam electric fry pan took the drink and baked it. Yellow cake mix, instant vanilla pudding powder, eggs, orange juice, vodka, and Galliano, topped with a spiked orange glaze poured on warm. Serving it meant you were stylish, experimental, possibly dangerous. When the cocktail went out of fashion in the late 1970s, the cake followed. The flavor it left behind went with it. Charlotte Russe was that elegant molded dessert appearing at fancy Christmas parties, a tower of Bavarian cream surrounded by ladyfingers and crowned with whipped cream rosettes. The preparation required making custard from scratch, folding in whipped cream and gelatin, then carefully lining a mold with ladyfingers before filling it with the cream mixture. The dessert had to chill for hours until set, then came the nerve-wracking moment of unmolding, a successful release revealing a perfect striped tower, while failure meant a collapsed mess. Bakeries in cities sold individual charlottes in paper cups, but the homemade version was the showpiece of Christmas buffets during the 1960s. Hostesses would dust the top with powdered sugar to look like snow or pipe elaborate whipped cream decorations in red and green. Charlotte Russe required skills home cooks once practiced regularly, making proper custard, whipping cream by hand, and working with gelatin. As these techniques faded from common knowledge, so did this graceful dessert. We're going to stay in this 1950 to 2000s period for a while, so buckle up. It's not a surprise either, since some of the most prolific dishes of the 20th century came out of this specific half of it. One of the most iconic recipes from that time was Forgotten Kisses, which were a meringue-based cookie. They got the name because the cookies would usually be left in the oven even after the time was done. If it doesn't make sense to you at first, they'd put them in for hours or overnight usually, so people would forget all about them until they were perfectly ready to eat. I guess there have been weirder names in history for food. Anyway, you're probably wondering what the point of leaving them for that long even is. After all, who doesn't like fresh cookies? People did this because it apparently made them firmer and gave them their unforgettable light and airy texture. Plus, meringue cookies stay okay even if you leave them for a really long while. These cookies were also kind of a sign of the times, because around when they were making waves in bakeries and holiday cookie exchanges, slow cookers also became a thing. It was a part of a new trend in American cooking where the masses were favoring recipes they could prep, leave, and forget about until they were ready, while still being inexpensive and easy enough to get. Hey, every family needs to eat, and sometimes doing it on a budget is ideal. So if that was you back in the 1960s or 70s, then you would often get your sugar rush satisfied with Forgotten Kisses. It was pretty inexpensive to make, and home baking was already the trend back then anyway. So, chocolate chiffon cake was a real classic back in the day. What made it so special? This cake was the ultimate two-in-one hybrid with the fluffiness of a sponge cake with the richness of chocolate. The secret to its light texture was beaten egg whites, which were gently folded into the batter. This cake was perfect for days when you wanted a chocolate treat without feeling too full. The best part? The powdered sugar topping that made the cake melt like fluffy clouds in your mouth. This delicious treat originated in California, and the recipe was kept a secret for 20 years until Harry Baker finally sold it and published it for the public in a Betty Crocker pamphlet in 1948. Unfortunately, as other cakes became more popular, everyone just kind of forgot about the delicious chiffon cake. Watergate cake, popping up in the 70s, was all about riding the wave of the famous scandal it's named after. This pistachio-flavored cake, made with pistachio pudding mix, sports a funky green color and a nutty taste, lightened up with some club soda. It's usually decked out with a frosting that's also got pudding in it and sprinkled with pecans, making for a pretty unique look and texture. The whole novelty of its theme and the connection to a wild moment in politics helped make it a hit. But as people started digging more natural and less artificially flavored sweets, its star faded. Watergate cake was typically a sheet cake, super easy to slice up for casual gatherings. This next dessert is the notorious liver ice cream. Yes, you heard that right. This bizarre 70s creation combined liver with the creamy delight of ice cream. Made from liver puree, sugar, cream, and sometimes a dash of brandy or vanilla, this dessert was an acquired taste, to say the least. The preparation involved blending the liver into a smooth paste, mixing it with the other ingredients and churning it like regular ice cream. It started as a trend in the 70s that embraced experimental and questionable flavors. Unfortunately, liver ice cream quickly fell out of favor. It was a disastrous attempt to combine savory and sweet. But in the end, the unsettling flavor mix of liver and ice cream left most people cringing and questioning the culinary experiment. Can you imagine the shock of finding liver in your dessert? Although they claimed it was healthy, even the most daring eaters found this oddity hard to swallow. It's safe to say this is one 70s dessert we're happy to leave behind. One of the most widely consumed ingredients in the entire Great Depression was potato. This star quarterback of a vegetable saved so many people's weekly dinner plans it's really not even funny. Potatoes could also be homegrown, and with the Depression, a concept known as backyard gardening became a thing. People used to grow crops in their backyards wherever they could, either to keep getting new food that didn't cost anything or to sell it for other stuff. One of the best ones to grow was a potato because you could make anything out of it, like potato donuts. These were even store-bought, and they were still really cheap. Think of them like soft, starchy, melt-in-your-mouth donuts made out of mashed potatoes. Lady Baltimore cake was the grande dame of Southern Christmas baking. A towering white layer cake with filling so complex it required its own recipe card. The cake was delicate white, made with egg whites only, producing ethereal texture that melted on the tongue. The filling was the star, a boiled frosting mixed with chopped figs, raisins, pecans, and candied cherries, creating sweet and chewy contrast to the tender crumb. The entire cake was enrobed in more fluffy white frosting, creating pristine appearance belying the richness within. Named for the novel by Owen Wister, Lady Baltimore cake became synonymous with gracious Southern entertaining and elegant holiday gatherings. Hostesses began preparations days in advance, knowing multiple components required careful timing. Cutting the first slice revealed the treasure hidden inside, and guests would gasp at generous filling studded with dried fruits and nuts. Date nut roll was the kind of dessert that made children hover anxiously around the kitchen, waiting for the moment it was sliced. It was not a pie or a cake, but a refrigerator candy, rolled by hand and packed with sweet dates, nuts, and just enough cookie crumbs to hold everything together. Families made it weeks before the holiday, storing it away in wax paper like treasure hidden in the back of the fridge. When you sliced it, the spirals of sticky fruit and crunchy nuts made every piece look like a tiny stained glass window, and the taste was just as memorable. It was sweet without being overwhelming, rich without being heavy, and easy to stretch for a crowd when money was tight. Making it was a labor of love, requiring time and patience that people no longer make space for. As store-bought candy boxes and pre-made sweets filled the shelves, the roll faded away, seen as too old-fashioned or too fiddly for modern kitchens, but back then it symbolized celebration, care, and the quiet excitement of a holiday dessert pulled from a cold shelf on a chilly evening. A little forgotten maybe, but never undeserving of its place at the table. Number 21, blackberry jam cake with caramel icing. The blackberries came from the fence line at the back of the tobacco patch. Every July, a grandmother would send 5 or 6 children out with lard buckets tied around their waists with baler twine and tell them not to come back until every bucket had a dark, heavy bottom. She spent the next 2 weeks making jam. A quart jar held about 14 cents worth of sugar and a summer's worth of work. That jam went into the cake at Christmas. 3 layers, spiced with cinnamon, allspice and clove, buttermilk for tang, a full pint of blackberry jam folded into the batter. Over it all, a sheet of caramel icing poured hot so it set into a thin sugar shell you had to crack with the side of your fork. Every serious Kentucky grandmother had a jam cake recipe and she did not share it. Not in writing. Not even with her own daughters, some of them, until the day she knew she was dying. Well, rice pudding is also one that wasn't just delicious, but also healthy. Don't you love it when sweet treats come with health benefits? Talk about a good deal. So, I'm sure I don't need to get into the nitty-gritty of this one because who doesn't remember the taste of rice pudding? It started out as a way to use up leftover rice and soon became the dessert that had everyone coming back for seconds. Not only this, but rice pudding was one of the easiest desserts to make and was made with ingredients easily found around the house like rice, milk, and sugar. Rice pudding originated in Europe and was brought to the States by European immigrants. Our grandmas decide to take the classic dessert up a notch by adding some key ingredients like vanilla, nutmeg, maple syrup, or cinnamon. Now, with the change in tastes and trends, this one never made it to big restaurants, but let's be honest, Grandma made it better than any Michelin star chef could possibly have. It's something about making sweet treats with a whole lot less sugar and a whole lot more love. Number 19. Sweet potato pie. This was not pumpkin pie with a different label. Sweet potato pie is its own thing, with its own history, and for Black families across the South, it was the centerpiece of every 4th of July table from Reconstruction forward. You roasted the sweet potatoes until the skin cracked and the flesh went soft and caramel dark. You peeled them, mashed them by hand, and mixed in butter, sugar, eggs, cinnamon, nutmeg, and a pour of evaporated milk. The filling was denser than pumpkin, smoother, with a sweetness that came from the potato itself, and not just from what you added to it. You poured it into a single crust and baked it low and slow until the top cracked in the center. That crack was the sign it was done. Every family had a version. Some added a splash of bourbon. Some used condensed milk instead of evaporated. Some put vanilla, some did not. The arguments about whose recipe was right could last an entire afternoon and never get settled, because every grandmother had proof that hers was the original. Sweet potato pie was brought to the 4th of July table the way a flag was brought to the porch. It was a declaration. It said, "This family is here, this family can cook, and this family remembers where it came from." The pie crossed every backyard fence, every church picnic, every family reunion where somebody drove 3 hours with it balanced on the back seat. Commercial bakeries tried to mass produce it in the 1990s and failed, because the texture of a real one cannot survive a factory. The frozen versions taste like spiced baby food. The real thing tasted like a woman's entire afternoon. Scripture cake was a beloved Christmas tradition that turned baking into a biblical treasure hunt, with each ingredient referenced by chapter and verse. Recipes listed items like Judges 5:25 for butter and Jeremiah 6:20 for sugar, requiring bakers to look up each passage in their family Bible. The result was typically a rich spice cake studded with figs, raisins, almonds, and honey, flavors evoking the ancient Holy Land. Sunday school classes and church groups baked scripture cakes together as holiday activities, combining religious education with kitchen skills. Mothers used the recipe to teach children both cooking techniques and biblical literacy in a single afternoon. The cakes were dense and aromatic, filled with warming spices of cinnamon, nutmeg, and cloves that filled kitchens with the smell of Christmas. Though the tradition has faded, scripture cake once represented how faith and food intertwined in American celebrations. She always started the crust the night before, crushed pecans pressed into flour and butter, baked until barely golden, cooled completely before anything touched it. In the morning came the cream cheese layer, beaten smooth with powdered sugar and folded into Cool Whip until it held its shape. Then the lemon pudding layer, spread cold and level with a spatula. then another cloud of Cool Whip on top. 4 hours in the refrigerator, sometimes overnight, and it came out cold and sliceable in clean squares. Lemon Lush had been around since the 1960s, but the convenience of the 1970s, instant pudding, tubs of Cool Whip, cream cheese at every grocery, turned it into a potluck staple from Ohio to Georgia. It was the dessert people asked her to bring. She brought it every time without being asked. After she was gone, nobody could remember exactly how thin she made the cream cheese layer or why it always tasted cooler than everyone else's. Pfeffernüsse were those small, round German spice cookies appearing in tins throughout December, their name meaning pepper nuts despite containing no actual nuts. The dough was dense with honey, molasses, and a complex blend of spices including white pepper, anise, cardamom, and cloves that gave them their distinctive bite. Baked until firm, the cookies were rolled in powdered sugar while still warm, creating a crackled coating that contrasted with the dark spiced interior. Unlike soft American cookies, Pfeffernüsse were meant to be hard. Almost too hard when fresh, they softened over days as the spices mellowed. German and Dutch immigrant families brought these recipes to America, where they became traditions in communities from Pennsylvania to the Midwest. The cookies kept for weeks in tins, improving with age as flavors married. Children often found them strange at first, but grew to crave them as adults. Making Pfeffernüsse meant connecting to old-world traditions, honoring ancestors who carried recipes across oceans. You're in luck if cookies are your thing. I got another solid one for you right out of the hearts of 1950 cookbooks. Cherry Winks, as you can guess, were this cookie that really highlighted how good a maraschino cherry can get. That wasn't all, though. It was one of the first cookies that used the stuff it did. The foundation for the cookies is an oatmeal cookie base after all, and that's been around way longer than either you or me. It was in the post-war period that most of the other ingredients involved with Cherry Winks started becoming something everyone everywhere in the States could afford and get. Still, this was a unique recipe, all things considered. I mean, where else will you hear about dates, cherries, and crushed cornflakes in a cookie winning a Pillsbury Bake-Off contest? Yeah, I thought so. The baking trends in the 1950s were pretty experimental, and here it shows. Plus, no one could say no to maraschino cherries anyway. Mix all that with rolled oats, brown sugar, and vanilla, plus some sweetened shredded coconut, all widely available commercial products now, and you can understand how this dish took off the way it did in a time where home baking was trending like never before. If you ever ask your grandma about this, I'm sure she can recall a Christmas or two where there were ample cherry winks to go around. A rolled chocolate sponge cake filled with cream. What's not to love? The chocolate roll was a fan favorite all the way from Europe, also known as the Swiss roll. This delicious treat was a thin sponge cake filled with icing, whipped cream, jam, or pretty much any filling you can possibly imagine. The chocolate roll was considered a sophisticated dessert, which made it perfect for fancy tea parties. There was a different version of this in almost every country you can name, and Japan even filled it with fruits like strawberries sometimes. It was a fan favorite. However, as other easier-to-make desserts gained popularity, the chocolate roll began to fade away. But those who remember it still hold a special place in their hearts for this chocolatey goodness. Butterscotch brownies, or blondies, mix it up with brown sugar, butter, flour, eggs, and baking powder, all jazzed up with butterscotch chips. These goodies swapped out chocolate for a sweet caramel-like vibe and caught on fast. They were super easy to whip up, making them a go-to for anyone needing a quick dessert fix without the intense richness of chocolate. Their ease of preparation and ability to store well made them popular for potlucks, school functions, and holiday treat exchanges. Over time, though, as bakers got more into gourmet and unique flavors, blondies weren't the main event anymore. Usually, you'd find them cut into squares, laid out on a platter, perfect for grabbing a bite without any fuss. The combo of a chewy middle with a bit of crunch around the edges really made these stand out. This next one is Jell-O salad, a dessert that combines flavored gelatin with mix-ins like canned fruit, shredded carrots, marshmallows, and even cottage cheese, just throwing a bunch of ingredients at each other. Traditionally, the gelatin was dissolved in hot water, mixed with the ingredients, and left to set in the fridge. Jell-O salad's roots go back to the mid-20th century when convenience foods became popular, but it truly hit its stride in the 70s. It was on every potluck and holiday table. Remember those kitschy commercials that were said to be fun and festive dishes? Despite the cheerful marketing, many secretly hated this jiggly creation. Who else remembers poking at it with a fork, trying to understand the mysterious bits? While it's a nostalgic trip down memory lane, Jell-O salad is one retro dessert that most of us are happy to leave in the past, with no regrets. Apple cornbread crisps were another really popular way of incorporating apples into an ingredient that has lasted many families throughout many droughts. Cornmeal is a staple ingredient for a lot of reasons, but you can sum them up by saying that it's always been there whenever you've needed it most. The Great Depression brought back the culture of apples, especially in rural areas and places with heavy farming land like the South. This used cornmeal to make apple-flavored cornbread, which was actually a pretty comforting dish to eat given the circumstances and the options available at the time. You could kind of call it a hybrid between a cobbler and a fruit pie, as the cornbread crust and the soft, spicy apples underneath definitely give off that feeling. Nope. As you can probably tell, growing fruits and vegetables in your own backyard became an exceptionally important fact of life. One of the other things that people became very fond of growing on a regular basis were grapes, like Concord grapes. This was especially true when you went over to areas like New York and the Midwest, which had a lot of strong potential soil-wise for home grapevines and grapeyards. White fruitcake offered a refined alternative to the dense, dark fruitcakes dominating many holiday tables during the 1950s. Made without molasses or dark spices, this elegant version featured golden cake batter studded with candied pineapple, pale golden raisins, blanched almonds, and light-colored candied cherries. The result sparkled like winter snow when sliced, its jewel-toned fruits visible against pale crumb. Bakers soaked dried fruits in brandy for days before mixing, ensuring each piece was plump and flavorful. The batter required careful folding to distribute heavy fruits evenly without deflating the delicate crumb. White fruitcake was often baked in decorative tube pans, wrapped in cheesecloth soaked with spirits and aged for weeks. The aging transformed the cake, mellowing alcohol and deepening flavors. Sliced thin on crystal plates, white fruitcake brought elegance to celebrations. Apple pandowdy was the rustic cousin of all the fancier apple desserts, a dish that did not care about looks or presentation and still managed to win every heart at the table. It began with sliced apples simmered with cinnamon, butter, and a touch of brown sugar until the whole house smelled like the inside of an orchard. Instead of laying a perfect crust over the top, cooks would break pieces of dough and scatter them unevenly, letting the edges sink into the bubbling fruit as it baked. The juices caramelized around the dough, turning each little piece into something crisp, chewy, and irresistible. This was a dessert for families who valued flavor over perfection, people who understood that the best dishes are sometimes the messiest. Children loved it because it felt fun, like a dessert that broke the rules, and adults loved it because it tasted like the orchard harvest served straight from the pan. But as crisps and cobblers became more popular and easier to sell in bakeries, the pandowdy quietly slipped away. Its uneven top was not camera-ready, and its old-fashioned name did not help it survive in a modern world. Still, anyone who ever ate it fresh from the oven remembers the way it tasted like fall itself, a forgotten treasure hiding in plain sight. Number 18. Chess pie. Chess pie is what you make when you have almost nothing. A stick of butter, a cup of sugar, 2 eggs, a tablespoon of cornmeal, a teaspoon of vinegar, a splash of vanilla if you had vanilla, a pie crust because you could always manage a pie crust out of flour and lard. That is the whole architecture. It bakes into a gold, cracked top over a layer of something between pudding and candy. It is rich in the way a poor family's dessert is rich, which is to say, with the last of what was on the shelf, used well. The Appalachian grandmothers who served chess pie at funeral dinners knew a quiet thing. A simple pie made from pantry scrapings says to a grieving family what a fancy cake cannot. It says, "I had you in mind. I stood in my kitchen and I thought of you." You can't possibly have a conversation about forgotten grandma desserts and not bring up the infamous blackberry cobbler. This one was a summer favorite when blackberries were in season and at their peak of flavor. So, cobblers have their roots in early American history. Pioneers who traveled across the country had to make do with what they had, and traditional pies were difficult to bake on the road. Instead, they would cover the fruit with a layer of biscuit dough or batter and cook it in a Dutch oven, creating what we now know as a cobbler. The blackberries didn't only give the cobbler some flavor, but also packed it with antioxidants. This dessert was particularly famous in southern states and was a staple at many southern family gatherings, church picnics, and barbecues. Number 17. Red, white, and blue trifle. Pound cake torn into chunks, layered with fresh strawberries, blueberries, and a custard made from scratch. You built it in a clear glass bowl so everyone could see the stripes from the side. Red fruit, white custard, blue fruit, and repeat. The top got a crown of whipped cream and a scattering of berries arranged to look like a flag if you squinted hard enough. Nobody called it a trifle back then. They called it the berry bowl, or just the thing in the glass dish. The recipe went back to English cookbooks from the 1700s, but American women stripped out the sherry and replaced it with vanilla. It disappeared when people stopped keeping clear glass trifle bowls in the china cabinet. The bowl was half the recipe. White fruitcake offered a refined alternative to the dense, dark fruitcakes dominating many holiday tables during the 1950s. Made without molasses or dark spices, this elegant version featured golden cake batter studded with candied pineapple, pale golden raisins, blanched almonds, and light-colored candied cherries. The result sparkled like winter snow when sliced, its jewel-toned fruits visible against pale crumb. Bakers soaked dried fruits in brandy for days before mixing, ensuring each piece was plump and flavorful. The batter required careful folding to distribute heavy fruits evenly without deflating the delicate crumb. White fruitcake was often baked in decorative tube pans, wrapped in cheesecloth soaked with spirits and aged for weeks. The aging transformed the cake, mellowing alcohol and deepening flavors. Sliced thin on crystal plates, white fruitcake brought elegance to celebrations. The recipe lived in church cookbooks and was never on the back of any package, which meant you had to know someone. Chocolate chips and butter melted over low heat until smooth, then pulled from the burner and cooled for 10 full minutes, not 5, because pouring hot chocolate over the marshmallows too soon turned the batch into one solid, shapeless mass with no visible structure at all. Pastel mini marshmallows went in, then chopped walnuts. Everything stirred carefully until every piece was coated. She shook sweetened coconut flakes across a long sheet of waxed paper, spooned half the mixture down the center, and rolled it into a log with her hands, pressing gently to compact the shape. 2 logs wrapped tight. Refrigerator overnight without fail. In the morning, she sliced them on a diagonal with a sharp knife, and each cross-section showed a stained glass pattern. Pastel circles of marshmallow suspended in dark chocolate, ringed in white coconut. At Christmas, the cut faces looked exactly like the windows of the church she had attended since childhood. Nobody in the next generation ever thought to ask for the recipe card. Springerl were those pale, embossed German cookies that looked almost too beautiful to eat, their surfaces pressed with intricate designs of flowers, animals, and Christmas scenes. The dough was simple: eggs, sugar, flour, and anise, but the technique was exacting, requiring the dough to be rolled, pressed with carved wooden molds, then left to dry overnight before baking. This drying step was crucial, allowing designs to set so they remained sharp after baking. The finished cookies were pale ivory with designs standing in relief like cameos. Families treasured their Springerl molds, carved wooden boards passed down through generations, each one a piece of folk art. The cookies were hard and dry, meant for dunking in coffee, their anise flavor intensifying over weeks of storage. Making Springerl required patience that modern cooks rarely possess: the overnight drying, the gentle handling, the precise temperature control. These cookies represented craftsmanship and a willingness to spend hours creating something beautiful. I guess wafers are close enough to a cookie that this could count, but I'll leave that for you to decide. If we go over to states like South Carolina, especially in places like Charleston, then you can find some traces of Benna wafers. They were sesame seed cookies that came from the Gullah Geechee people of the Low Country, and the Benna seeds were a West African variant that were brought in because of the slave trades. The Gullah Geechee were descendants of those same slaves who had worked in plantations across South Carolina and Georgia, and a lot of their popular recipes that made use of Benny seeds would become mainstays of the cuisine in those areas. They had specific knowledge on how to grow these seeds, as well as how to properly make use of them in cooking, and they were always used in sweets and desserts even then too. In their culture, it's meant to be good luck, so dishes that made use of them were for holidays more than anything else. They were given as gifts or brought on over at parties as a snack, and they had a lovely nutty flavor that gave them a lot of support at crowded parties. Later on, throughout the years, it became more common for others to use dishes like Benny wafers as Christmas desserts, especially if you were having a table that was entirely home-cooked. Not that people had that many options for buying stuff for Christmas stores back then, not like we do now. Speaking of, what do you guys usually get for Christmas food? Or do you not order or buy anything at all? Everything's bigger in Texas, and that includes their sheet cake. The Texas sheet cake was a large, thin chocolate cake topped with a poured chocolate icing. It was perfect for feeding a crowd back when the wallets were a bit tighter for most folks. The cake was incredibly moist and rich, and the icing was often made with cocoa, butter, and pecans, which made it easy to whip out in a short amount of time. Think fudgy brownies in cake form. The craziest part? This used to be a staple at funerals. This treat was also a hit at churches, which gave it the name of church lady cake. Now it was mostly a crowd pleaser, but you can have it all for yourself too. We don't judge here. Since more sophisticated desserts like cinnamon rolls and tiramisu entered the chat, the Texas sheet cake couldn't keep up and faded away. Magic Pan crepe cakes come from those Magic Pan restaurants that made crepe dishes a big deal back in the 60s and 70s. Here's how they do it. They layer up thin crepes with all sorts of fillings, from sweet creams and fruits to savory cheeses and spinach. Basic crepe batter is pretty simple, just flour, eggs, milk, and butter. But when you stack them up and fill them just right, it turns into something special. Each layer was carefully assembled to ensure the flavors melded beautifully, providing a gourmet experience that was rare at the time. These crepe cakes were a hit because you could watch them being made right in front of you, which was pretty cool back then. Though they were a favorite for a while, as the Magic Pan spots closed down and eating out got more casual, crepe cakes weren't as common. When they served them, it was always with style, dressed up with a little sauce or a sprinkle of powdered sugar to make them look as good as they tasted. And to the dessert, that often turned out wrong. Forgotten cookies were made from egg whites, sugar, vanilla, and chocolate chips. These meringue cookies were baked by whipping the egg whites and sugar, folding in the chips, and leaving them in a preheated oven that was turned off. This method promised a perfect cookie, but often resulted in inconsistent textures, from too dry to too chewy. Cookies are supposed to be nice, aren't they? But forgotten cookies had other plans. Its name is mostly because you could forget them in the oven and they'd turn out nice. But now, we want to end this toxic relationship. While they hold a special place in retro dessert lore, forgotten cookies are one treat. Many are happy to forget. People use this fruit to make things like ruby grape pies, since no part of the harvest was meant to go to waste. This became a pretty efficient pie to make when you were short on ingredients and couldn't afford the main selling point, which would usually be some kind of fruit. This pie was really popular in places like the Northwest Pacific and California. Places that had a pre-established culture of grape growing took a lot of advantage of it, and places like those even grew red grapes, which is what was used for ruby grape pies. Maybe that was self-explanatory, though. Anyways, one of the things you often hear about the Great Depression is how much everyone struggled to not let anything go to waste. Ruby grape pies particularly called for grapes at a specific stage of their shelf life, which is when they were really ripe, almost bordering on being too ripe to eat. This is why when the grapes did approach that stage, instead of wasting them, people turned them into a nice pie filling that had a vibrant color, a juicy and tart-like flavor, and some real stomach-filling potential. Dishes that looked and tasted nice were a real rarity, so people held this one close. Hickory nut cake was a regional treasure showcasing wild nuts gathered from American forests each autumn. In areas where hickory trees grew abundantly, families spent fall weekends cracking notoriously hard shells to extract small, intensely flavored nut meats. The nuts had richer, more complex flavor than commercial walnuts or pecans, with slight bitterness perfect for baking. The cake was typically butter-rich pound cake or spice cake, with hickory nuts folded into batter and pressed onto frosting. Some recipes called for brown sugar or caramel frosting, complementing the nut's earthy sweetness. Gathering and cracking hickory nuts was communal activity, with families sharing labor and bounty. The cakes carried connection to land and seasons that store-bought ingredients could never replicate. Today, hickory nuts are rarely seen in markets, making this once common Christmas cake nearly impossible to recreate. Prune cake was one of those desserts people loved long before they ever admitted it. A moist, spiced treat that showed up on countless holiday tables thanks to its deep flavor and long shelf life. Grandmothers especially swore by it, calling it their secret weapon because it never dried out and always tasted better the next day. The prunes disappeared into the batter, lending sweetness and moisture without announcing themselves too boldly, and the spices wrapped everything in a warm, comforting aroma. It was a cake that stretched ingredients wisely, perfect for large families and tight budgets. Children would roll their eyes at the thought of prunes, but one bite of that sticky sweet crumb made them believers. It was a dessert born from practicality, the kind of treat that made the most of what people had on hand. But as times changed and holiday desserts became flashier, prune cake was left behind. It did not look glamorous, it did not have fancy toppings, and it did not fit the modern obsession with picture-perfect food. So it vanished, even though anyone who ever loved it can still taste it in their memory, a quiet classic forgotten but never truly gone. Number 17. Buttermilk pie. Buttermilk was not wasted in a hillbilly kitchen. Not ever. What was left after the butter came out of the churn went into biscuits, into pancakes, into the dog's bowl on a hot afternoon, and once or twice a month, into a pie. A cup and a half of buttermilk, a cup and a half of sugar, 3 eggs, a stick of butter, flour, lemon if a neighbor down the road had brought one up from Tennessee. The custard set creamy and tangy with a thin, crackled sugar skin on top. A farm wife in Owsley County named it a desperation pie because she made it in the weeks before the first peach came ripe. Her children called it the best pie she made, but she never believed them. Next up, we gave the rhubarb pie. This is another one of Grandma's treats that wasn't too sweet or heavy on the stomach. It was a springtime hit made with fresh rhubarb sugar and often a touch of cinnamon or nutmeg. Rhubarb grows abundantly in gardens, and this recipe was the perfect way to use it up and celebrate the flavors of the season. Remember when we'd wait all year long for spring to come just for a slice of this one? Well, some grandmas canned or froze the rhubarb to use throughout the year. Rhubarb is naturally quite tart and can be too sour to eat raw. In pies, it was typically paired with sugar to create a more palatable and balanced flavor. Grandmas often experimented with different amounts of sugar and other ingredients like strawberries to complement the tartness of rhubarb. Number 20. Gooseberry Fool. Most people alive today have never even seen a gooseberry, but in the 1940s and 1950s, they grew wild along fence lines from Ohio to Missouri. You picked them green, stewed them down with sugar until they turned into a tart, pale mash, and then you folded that into whipped cream. That was the whole recipe. The texture was loose and lumpy. It looked like nothing. But the flavor had a sourness that cut through all the heavy food at a cookout, and people who tasted it once asked for it every year after. Gooseberry bushes fell out of American yards when suburbs replaced farms, and the dessert went with them. The English still make it. We let it go without even noticing it was gone. Hickory nut cake was a regional treasure showcasing wild nuts gathered from American forests each autumn. In areas where hickory trees grew abundantly, families spent fall weekends cracking notoriously hard shells to extract small, intensely flavored nut meats. The nuts had richer, more complex flavor than commercial walnuts or pecans, with slight bitterness perfect for baking. The cake was typically butter-rich pound cake or spice cake, with hickory nuts folded into batter and pressed onto frosting. Some recipes called for brown sugar or caramel frosting, complementing the nuts' earthy sweetness. Gathering and cracking hickory nuts was communal activity, with families sharing labor and bounty. The cakes carried connection to land and seasons that store-bought ingredients could never replicate. Today, hickory nuts are rarely seen in markets, making this once common Christmas cake nearly impossible to recreate. The name came from the banks of the river, dark, dense, layered like something geological, and whoever made the first one understood that chocolate could be stacked higher than anyone thought reasonable. The Mississippi mud pie that spread through American home kitchens in the 1970s descended from the Deep South mud cake of the 1920s, traced by some food historians to Vicksburg, where a single-layer fudge cake was topped with marshmallow sauce and frosting while still hot, the two layers sinking together into something molten. By the time the Chart House restaurant chain put it on its menu in the 1970s, the recipe had grown into a layered production of brownie base, chocolate custard, whipped cream, and pecans. Home cooks stripped it back to what they could manage: fudge base baked in a 9x13, marshmallows pressed in hot, fudge frosting poured over top. Neither cake nor pie nor pudding, but all three at once. Sugar plums were those mysterious confections immortalized in holiday stories, yet few modern cooks could tell you what they actually were. Real sugar plums were handmade candies consisting of nuts or dried fruit coated in layer after layer of sugar syrup, each coat applied and dried before the next, until the center was encased in a smooth shell. The process took days of patient work, dipping and drying repeatedly, until the sugar plums reached proper size and glossy finish. Inside might be an almond, candied ginger, or a spiced prune, each variety a different flavor surprise. During the Victorian era and into the mid-20th century, confectioners made sugar plums in quantities for Christmas, selling them wrapped in tissue paper. The vision of sugar plums dancing required knowing what they were: jewel-like candies in pink, green, and white that caught light like precious stones. As commercial candy took over, the art of making sugar plums faded, leaving only the name behind. What was once a beloved confection became merely a word. Hard sauce was the essential accompaniment to steamed puddings, a simple mixture of butter, powdered sugar, and brandy beaten until light and fluffy, then chilled until firm. The name was misleading. Hard sauce wasn't a sauce at all, but a flavored butter that melted into silky pools when spooned onto warm pudding. Making it required beating butter until nearly white, gradually incorporating sugar and spirits until the mixture could be piped into decorative shapes. Some families added nutmeg or vanilla, others used rum or whiskey instead of brandy, each household developing their signature version. The sauce was made ahead and refrigerated, sometimes for weeks, allowing flavors to meld. At the Christmas table, hard sauce was presented in a pretty dish with its own small spoon, passed around for each guest. Children often found the brandy too strong, but adults savored how cold butter melted against hot pudding. Without hard sauce, steamed pudding was incomplete. Yet today, few cooks know this classic even exists. Back to the Jell-O takeover of the 60s, we have cherry chiffon gelatin, which just sounds like something that tastes and smells like flowers. You'd be kinda right. I mean, it's definitely got a very sweet taste overall to it, and the appearance did make it look like an edible flower. It had a very light and airy texture despite how it used whipped egg whites and cream, and it became a holiday favorite at potlucks. You'd serve this with salads and other gelatin-based desserts, and believe me, it worked every time. People love it when a pretty-looking dish tastes good too, so even if there were better gelatin dishes out there taste-wise, this was the perfect thing for a party. Cherry chiffon gelatin wasn't really the kind of dish you would make for yourself at home, though. It just had a presence to it, the kind that made you recognize it as a dish for a finer table and occasion. People would save dishes like these for important days on the calendar. After all, there weren't many casual chiffon things to eat, as it was considered one of the foods of the wealthy. It wasn't until much later when commercial brands for the stuff like Knox Gelatin and Jell-O were founded in 1890 and 1897, making it something that people could enjoy even at their homes. While it's true that eventually gelatin-based desserts became the norm at potlucks and church dinners, it was still also true that chiffon desserts were still reserved for when you really wanted to make dinner count. The Mississippi mud pie was a chocolate lover's dream, rich, gooey, and full of fudge. This wasn't your grandma's good old pecan pie. This delicious treat featured a chocolate crust and a fudgy filling and was often topped with whipped cream or even more chocolate. But the graham cracker crust was definitely the star of the show. As the name suggests, this cake was created in Mississippi as a variant of the plain mud cake. Some different versions also include marshmallows, pecans, walnuts, pudding, or even liquor. It made all the buzz in the 1980s and was a hit at the kids' table. So why did it vanish from our tables? Well, as lighter desserts became more popular, the Mississippi mud pie became nothing more than a part of history. Poke cake hit the scene in the 70s and got everyone excited because you could do so much with it. After baking a simple vanilla or chocolate cake, you poke holes all over it and fill those up with Jell-O, pudding, or sweetened condensed milk. This trick lets the filling soak into the cake, making it super moist and adding layers of flavor. Jell-O pushed this idea big time, showing everyone how a plain cake could turn into a showstopper. It was a hit because you could tweak it with different fillings depending on what you were into. But as tastes got more sophisticated and folks leaned towards less sugary stuff, poke cake kind of lost its spotlight. It was usually served in a big dish, looking casual and family-friendly. You'd often see it with a fluffy layer of whipped cream on top, maybe some fruit or sprinkles too, just to make those flavors pop. Divinity is this super fluffy cloud-like candy that popped up in the US early in the 20th century. It's mostly whipped up from egg whites, sugar, and corn syrup, and often you'll find nuts like pecans or walnuts thrown in for a nice crunch. Making Divinity can be tricky because humidity can totally mess with it, but when you get it right, it's like eating a sweet, airy piece of heaven. It got super popular around the holidays because it's a blast to make with family and tastes like a festive treat. Over time, though, as quicker, easier sweets came around, not as many folks made it from scratch. It's usually scooped onto wax paper to set into little clouds, sometimes topped with a nut. But nothing said. Cringe as loudly as this next dessert. It's called grasshopper pie. This no-bake pie combined a chocolate cookie crust and a filling of whipped cream, marshmallow fluff, and crème de menthe, giving it that unmistakable minty flavor and color. Preparation was simple. Mix the marshmallow and crème de menthe, fold in the whipped cream, pour into the crust, and chill. Grasshopper pie peaked in popularity in the 70s, thanks to its striking appearance and ease of preparation. Despite the hype, its overly sweet and minty flavor gave it many one-star reviews. So they had to go. And why was it even named after an insect? Yuck! I don't know if you've ever heard of a 3-ingredient cake, but a Pennsylvania Dutch funny cake is exactly that. It was one of the cakes that was known for its thriftiness and resourcefulness. It took next to nothing to make, only needing chocolate or molasses syrup and an unbaked pie crust. If you had any kind of flour or flour substitute and cocoa powder, that would work too. It was a bit of a celebratory dish at that time, since this one actually did take typical baking ingredients, but the result was worth it. It was a great cake to have on a budget, and it lasted a lot of households, giving them sugar rushes when they desperately needed them more than anything else in the day to survive. Apple stack cake emerged from Appalachian kitchens as a communal Christmas tradition where neighbors each contributed a layer to build a towering holiday centerpiece. Unlike conventional layer cakes, this one used thin, cookie-like layers made from simple dough enriched with sorghum or molasses. Between each layer went thick spread of dried apple filling, cooked with spices until dark and sticky. The assembled cake was wrapped and left to rest for days, during which moisture from the filling softened dry layers into tenderness. The number of layers in a bride's apple stack cake once indicated her popularity, with more layers meaning more friends had contributed. Christmas versions might tower 8 or 10 layers high, testament to community bonds and shared tradition. The flavor was unlike any other, more reminiscent of spiced apple butter than traditional dessert. Each slice revealed striped layers, a visual record of many hands. Butterscotch pie was the kind of dessert that made people stop mid-conversation when it was carried to the table, its glossy meringue peaks and golden filling catching the light in a way no one could ignore. The magic started on the stovetop, where sugar and butter melted together to create a deep caramel flavor that filled the kitchen with warmth. Once the mixture thickened into a silky custard, it was poured into a flaky crust and crowned with a cloud of meringue. Families loved it because it felt luxurious without being expensive, a dessert that tasted like a special occasion even on ordinary days. During the holidays, butterscotch pie was always one of the first things to disappear, with children fighting over the corner slices where the meringue browned just a little more. But as boxed pudding mixes and frozen pies became household staples, this stovetop masterpiece faded out. No one wanted to stand over a pot stirring carefully, watching for that perfect moment when the custard thickened. The world got busier, and the pie slipped quietly into memory. Yet anyone who tasted it fresh will tell you that nothing made with shortcuts ever came close, a lost masterpiece of sweetness and tradition. Okay, so this next dessert's reputation speaks for itself. I'm talking about snickerdoodle cookies. This bad boy was timeless. You could be 5 or you could be 45 and still enjoy the soft, chewy snickerdoodles coated in cinnamon sugar, which gave them a sweet, slightly spicy flavor. And trust me, it was impossible to resist. Snickerdoodles are considered a classic American cookie, with a history that dates back to the late 1800s. 2 centuries later, they're still a fan favorite. Now, you could get these at many popular bakeries, but nothing beats what Granny whipped up in minutes back in the day. This biscuit was the star of Grandma's cookie jar, and always the first one to disappear. Orange slice cake was a holiday surprise wrapped inside a dessert, dense and chewy with bursts of candied orange that lit up every bite. People loved making it because it felt playful, different from the usual pies and puddings. The chopped orange candy slices melted slightly in the oven, blending with nuts, coconut, and a rich batter to create a texture unlike anything else on the table. Children always recognized the taste immediately, since those little orange candies were a rare treat any other time of year. Families baked this cake weeks in advance because the flavor deepened as it sat, becoming richer and more complex with every passing day. It was the kind of dessert that made people smile before they even tasted it. But as candy companies changed their recipes and holiday traditions shifted towards simpler desserts, orange slice cake faded away. It was too old-fashioned, too sweet, too heavy for modern tastes, and eventually it disappeared from cookbooks and memories alike. Still, for anyone who grew up eating it, the flavor remains unforgettable. A cheerful dessert from a different time. Apple stack cake emerged from Appalachian kitchens as a communal Christmas tradition where neighbors each contributed a layer to build a towering holiday centerpiece. Unlike conventional layer cakes, this one used thin, cookie-like layers made from simple dough enriched with sorghum or molasses. Between each layer went thick spread of dried apple filling, cooked with spices until dark and sticky. The assembled cake was wrapped and left to rest for days, during which moisture from the filling softened dry layers into tenderness. The number of layers in a bride's apple stack cake once indicated her popularity, with more layers meaning more friends had contributed. Christmas versions might tower 8 or 10 layers high, testament to community bonds and shared tradition. The flavor was unlike any other, more reminiscent of spiced apple butter than traditional dessert. Each slice revealed striped layers, a visual record of many hands. You could not make it without the liqueurs, and everyone at the table knew that. The grasshopper pie was built around crème de menthe and crème de cacao, the 2 halves of the cocktail it borrowed its name from, and no substitute produced the same cool, mint dark chocolate alchemy. Crushed Nabisco chocolate wafers pressed into a pie plate with melted butter formed the crust. The filling was miniature marshmallows melted in a double boiler, then folded with both liqueurs and whipped cream until it turned the pale, luminous green of shallow water. 4 hours in the freezer. At the table, A vegetable peeler dragged across semi-sweet chocolate sent dark curls falling across the green surface. The transformation of a cocktail into a frozen dessert was exactly the kitchen logic the 1970s loved. Candied citrus peel was the jewel-like garnish decorating Christmas cakes and cookies. Strips of orange, lemon, and grapefruit rind transformed through days of simmering into translucent, sugar-crusted confections. The process began by scoring citrus rinds and soaking them in water for days, changing the water repeatedly to remove bitterness. Then came slow simmering in increasingly concentrated sugar syrups, the peels gradually absorbing sweetness while maintaining their shape. The final step was drying, either air-dried on racks or rolled in granulated sugar for a crystalline coating. The finished peels could be dipped in chocolate, chopped into fruitcakes, or eaten as candy, each piece a concentrated burst of citrus tempered by sweetness. During the 1960s, no Christmas fruitcake was complete without homemade candied peel. Making it required unhurried time that Christmas preparations once demanded, days of attention and watching the transformation happen. The peels kept for months, allowing cooks to prepare them well in advance. The first chiffon pie was brought in by Harry Baker in the 1920s, and ever since then, chiffon-style dishes have always been considered a finer dish. One of the salads you would see with a cherry chiffon gelatin is a cranberry fluff salad. Cranberries are already something you must be pretty used to living in this country, since every Christmas boomer can never seem to let go of their classic cranberry dishes that they swear have been passed down since forever in their family. They're actually not wrong. Cranberries are one of the few things that grow natively in America after all the way from the East Coast to the central United States, which is why it's so popular. These salads were a side dish, but also a dessert, and it was getting harder to tell which was which since both genres of food started taking elements from each other thanks to dishes like this. It was at its highest popularity during the 1970s after the war period, when people had settled back into eating for fun and not for fuel. Despite how it's such a nice dish to look at and eat, it was also forgotten relatively quickly into the 2010s. Thankfully, the recent interest in reinterpreting old American dishes from the 20th century has helped it have a little bit of a revival, so who knows? Maybe we can see a full comeback. The chocolate sauerkraut cake was a showstopper back in the day. Now, I know what you're thinking. Sauerkraut in a cake? I've got to be kidding, right? Well, don't knock it till you try it. The sauerkraut added moisture and a slight tang to the cake, which balanced out the sweetness of the chocolate. Plus, once baked, the sauerkraut became almost undetectable, leaving behind the chocolate cake of our dreams. The big question remains, who decided to put sauerkraut in chocolate cake? The year was 1965, and bakers decided to make a cake that kept everyone guessing. No one could figure out the secret ingredient that gave this cake its tanginess. The Depression era was all about adding whatever you could find to your chocolate cakes. This dessert died down because this weird combination didn't sit right with people as the world kept progressing. But hey, if you ever dare to try this one, you're welcome. Imagine a cake that's like a party in every slice. That's tequila sunrise cake for you. It's inspired by the cocktail, mixing up orange zest and grenadine in the batter, with a good shot of tequila to kick it up. The grenadine does its magic to make the cake look like a sunrise, all vibrant and inviting. This cake was a hit because who doesn't want to try a boozy dessert that looks as fun as it tastes? Perfect for adult parties and summer gatherings, this cake brought a zestful twist to any celebration. But as folks started leaning towards simpler and more wholesome flavors, this flashy cake became less of a go-to. When it's served up, it's usually all dressed up with an orange slice or a cherry on top, making it perfect for any bash. It's a fun twist on dessert, turning your typical cake into something that's a toast to good times. Who could forget the polarizing taste of anise cookies? They were made from simple ingredients like flour, sugar, butter, eggs, and a generous amount of anise extract or seeds. Traditionally, they were mixed, rolled out, cut into festive shapes, and baked to a light, crispy perfection. While they became a holiday staple among European immigrant families in the U.S., many kids found these cookies the least appealing on the plate. Did your family have an anise cookie recipe passed down from great-grandma? But their strong licorice taste isn't for everyone, It's no wonder these cookies are more of a memory than a modern-day favorite. We left the old and fell in love with new stuff, and there's no going back. Grand-Père dans le Sirop might make you think you're ordering some real fancy pearl of French cooking at a restaurant, but it's just a humble French-Canadian dish that literally translates to grandfather in syrup. It's a really good dish that just needs some basic ingredients, like sugar, flour, baking powder, water, and milk. If some of these weren't available, then you could make do with the next closest substitute. And I know flour was something not every house could rely on having. The Depression made a lot of basic things get out of reach like that, but this was basically just dumplings cooked in a sweet syrup, and dumplings were something that the populace had more or less given up on seeing for a while, so this dish was a little ray of hope. In rural areas and French-speaking communities, this dish took small amounts of sugar and syrup and made the best use out of it, making a dish that could be passed around the entire family. Sorghum cake drew its distinctive character from the thick, dark syrup that once sweetened tables across the rural South and Midwest. Before refined sugar became affordable, sorghum molasses was the sweetener of choice, produced by pressing juice from sorghum cane and cooking it down to syrupy thickness. The resulting cakes had deep, complex sweetness with notes of caramel, smoke, and something almost metallic that refined sugar could never provide. Spices like ginger, cinnamon, and cloves were essential partners, their warmth balancing sorghum's intensity. The batter was often made with buttermilk, which reacted with acidic sorghum to create tender crumb. Farm families treasured their sorghum sources, often trading with neighbors who operated small mills each autumn. Christmas cakes made with sorghum connected families to agricultural heritage. Though sorghum syrup can still be found, the cakes it sweetened have largely disappeared. Pumpkin roll with cream cheese filling was the pride of holiday bakers in the 1970s and 1980s, a dessert that quietly proved who had real confidence in the kitchen. It was never something you could rush. You baked the thin pumpkin cake just right, warm enough to roll but cool enough not to tear, then wrapped it in a sugared towel so it held its shape. Families watched mothers and grandmothers handle it like a fragile secret, knowing a single mistake meant starting over. When the cream cheese filling was spread across the unrolled cake, the whole kitchen filled with vanilla and spice. Rolling it back up brought a moment of suspense before those perfect spirals appeared later on the cutting board. But desserts with shortcuts slowly replaced it, and fewer people wanted to spend an afternoon coaxing a thin sheet of cake into behaving. Still, those who tasted it remember the soft pumpkin sponge, the cool, tangy filling, and the feeling that this dessert was part skill and part celebration. Number 16. Persimmon pudding. Wild persimmons are not friendly fruit. Bite into one before the first hard frost and your mouth will turn inside out. But wait for the frost. Gather the soft orange fruit off the ground under the tree. Push the pulp through a colander to get the seeds out, and suddenly you have a sweet, dark, honey-flavored mash that tastes like the woods in October. The grandmother in Wise County, Virginia, stirred the pulp into a batter of flour, sorghum, buttermilk, an egg, and a spoon of soda. She baked the pudding in a sheet pan over a slow fire for 90 minutes. It came out dense, dark brown, slightly spongy. Cut into squares, eaten warm with a pat of butter melting into the top. A pudding made of a fruit that grew for free on a fence line. 30 cents worth of flour. Nothing else needed buying. Since we're on the topic of pies, cherry pie was another one of Grandma's culinary masterpieces. This was the kind of dessert that made any bad day 10 times better with just one bite. Traditionally, cherry pie was made with sour cherries rather than sweet cherries. Morello cherries were one of the most common kinds of cherry used, but other varieties such as the black cherry were also popular. So, cherry pie is considered one of the most iconic pies in America, second to only apple pie. There's a famous story about young George Washington chopping down a cherry tree and then confessing to it saying, "I cannot tell a lie." Legend says this cemented the importance of cherry in American history and inspired our grandmas to add the fruit to their delicious desserts and meals. Cherry salad was another popular dessert back in the day. Number 18. Spice cake with boiled icing. The cake itself was plain. Flour, butter, eggs, brown sugar, and enough cinnamon, allspice, and clove to make the kitchen smell like November in the middle of July. But the icing was the event. You boiled sugar and water to thread stage, then poured it in a thin stream into beaten egg whites while whisking without stopping. If you stopped, it seized. If you poured too fast, it went flat. Done right, it piled up in stiff white peaks that looked like meringue but held firm in the heat. Women made this cake because it traveled. You could carry it across a gravel parking lot in 90-degree weather, and the icing would not slide off. That mattered when your reputation was riding on a church potluck. Jam cake was a spice-filled wonder that transformed pantry staples into holiday splendor across southern and midwestern kitchens. Blackberry jam was the traditional choice, folded into batter rich with buttermilk, spices, and sometimes cocoa, creating moist cake with fruity sweetness throughout. The jam provided both flavor and moisture, making the cake tender and forgiving even for less experienced bakers. Caramel frosting was the classic accompaniment, its burnt sugar notes complementing the berry-laced crumb perfectly. Some families used whatever jam they had preserved from summer gardens, meaning each year's cake tasted different depending on harvest. The cake was dense enough to slice cleanly yet moist enough to melt in the mouth. Christmas baking often meant pulling out the last precious jars of summer preserves, transforming them into holiday splendor. Jam cake represented farmhouse tradition of wasting nothing. In February of 1978, Mrs. L. H. Wiggins from Greensboro, North Carolina, submitted a recipe to Southern Living magazine that would become the most requested in the magazine's history. The hummingbird cake started like banana bread, mashed bananas, flour, sugar, cinnamon, baking soda, but then came crushed pineapple and a full cup of chopped pecans, and the batter turned dense and almost tropical. It baked in round layers, dark gold, the pecans giving each slice a crunch against the soft interior. The cream cheese frosting was thick and tangy, smoothed over the layers and crowned with more pecans. It was not a light cake. It was meant for birthdays and homecomings and Sunday afternoons when someone important was coming to the table. Readers in the southern states searched for the recipe for decades after its publication. Most of them were really searching for the kitchen it had come from. Mincemeat pie was the quintessential Victorian Christmas dessert that lingered on American tables well into the 1970s, its filling a mysterious mixture of dried fruits, spices, suet, and sometimes actual meat. Traditional recipes called for beef or venison mixed with apples, raisins, currants, and candied peel, all preserved in brandy for months. The preparation began in autumn, allowing flavors to marry before the holidays. Grandmothers packed the mixture into crocks, topping up with more brandy as weeks passed. The filling was spooned into pastry shells and baked until the crust turned golden and filling bubbled through decorative slits. Each slice revealed dark, jeweled fruit suspended in rich, boozy syrup. Children often rejected mincemeat pie as too strange, while adults savored its complex flavors that spoke of centuries-old traditions. By the 1980s, most families had abandoned the authentic version for jarred substitutes, losing the depth that only months of aging could provide. Sticking to the cranberry theme, we have something that'll really take your imagination for a run this time. Look, we all love cheese balls. You love them. I have an unhealthy obsession with them. They've always been there for us when there was only sleep for dinner. So they're a pretty personal topic. When people think about cheese balls, they think of a munch-oriented, cheese-filled heaven. So when you combine dried cranberries with sharp cheddar into the classic cheese balls, you get a controversial dish. I don't know how people loved it at parties in the Northeast, but they couldn't get enough of this there. Obviously, not everyone had the same enthusiasm for this. It took two completely opposite ends of the flavor spectrum and mixed them into cheese balls of all things. What do you think? Would you give it an honest shot? Speaking of tough times, the chocolate depression cake was one of the best inventions of the Depression era. So, what makes this one so special? Well, you can bake this one without any eggs, milk, or butter. I'm all ears. Despite its humble beginnings, this cake was a delicious treat that was not only tasty, but also budget-friendly. Name a better combo, I'll wait. This cake was also called the poor man's cake, and a fancier version had raisins as toppings. It has been declared to be the most worthwhile cake ever made. The Depression era is gone, and so is the chocolate depression cake. This cake was a great example of great things being born in tough times. Fruit cocktail cake is a throwback to when bakers loved using whatever was in the pantry, and canned fruit cocktail was a staple. This cake mixes the canned fruit, including the syrup, with standard cake fixings like flour and eggs. It's crowned with a brown sugar topping that gets all nice and crispy in the oven. It was super popular for its ease and the fact that you could whip it up on a whim. Often served at community potlucks and family reunions, this cake was a go-to for its convenience and crowd-pleasing sweetness. As fresher and more natural ingredients became the norm, though, this cake kinda took a back seat. It's typically baked in a square pan and served straight from the dish, making it the perfect comfort food at family gatherings. The moist texture with that sweet, crunchy top makes it a simple pleasure, just a real cozy, old-school dessert. Next up, we have the cornflake tart, a 70s dessert that brought the crunch of breakfast cereal to the table. This tart features a short-crust pastry base filled with a sticky mixture of golden syrup, butter, and sugar, topped with crunchy cornflakes. The preparation involved baking the pastry shell, pouring in the warm syrup mixture, and sprinkling the cornflakes on top before popping it back in the oven. While it was a school dinner classic in the UK, loved for its sugary hit and satisfying crackle, its sheer sugar overload made it a tooth-achingly sweet treat. Not to mention that it often resulted in sticky, hard-to-clean baking pans. Did anyone else have this as a childhood favorite? Well, you're grown now and wise, and you know that all that sugar is not good for you. This crunchy, sticky dessert is best enjoyed in small doses, if at all. I think if you had to circle out and pick one specific dish that best shows the kind of mentality people were under every day during the Great Depression, you would pick water pie. The name itself shows you how frugal this dish really is, and it's pretty true to the branding too. It just takes water, flour, and sugar, and if available, you can use butter and vanilla extract. A lot of people took notes out of mock food culture, which itself was a product of the Depression. People would try to make imitations of actual popular dishes, but since the ingredients were never available for them, and usually the goal was to make something that could feed the entire family, imitations using inferior ingredients or substitutes became popular. This pie didn't even really need eggs and milk, and it showed just how much people were willing to make do with whatever they had, as long as they got some food. You just pour water into a pre-baked crust and then mix in pretty small amounts of the rest of the ingredients because you still want to be saving. The taste wasn't as strong as it could have been if people were a bit more generous, but for what it was worth and how much the ingredients were stretched, it did still taste amazing. It was more of a custard on the inside than a pie, but it was definitely a way to have a pie craving satisfied back then. Jam cake was a spice-filled wonder that transformed pantry staples into holiday splendor across Southern and Midwestern kitchens. Blackberry jam was the traditional choice, folded into batter rich with buttermilk, spices, and sometimes cocoa, creating moist cake with fruity sweetness throughout. The jam provided both flavor and moisture, making the cake tender and forgiving even for less experienced bakers. Caramel frosting was the classic accompaniment, its burnt sugar notes complementing the berry-laced crumb perfectly. Some families used whatever jam they had preserved from summer gardens, meaning each year's cake tasted different depending on harvest. The cake was dense enough to slice cleanly yet moist enough to melt in the mouth. Christmas baking often meant pulling out the last precious jars of summer preserves, transforming them into holiday splendor. Jam cake represented farmhouse tradition of wasting nothing. Shoe-fly pie was a slice of Appalachian history wrapped in a layer of sticky molasses and crumb topping, a dessert born from frugality and resourcefulness. It was called shoe-fly because the sweet smell drew flies toward the table and cooks had to shoo them away as the pie cooled. Families made it because molasses was cheaper and easier to store than sugar, making it the perfect holiday ingredient for households that had more hard work than money. The pie baked into a deep, gooey layer at the bottom with a crumbly cake-like topping on top, creating a texture that felt both rustic and indulgent. Children loved it because it was sweet enough to feel forbidden, and adults enjoyed it because every bite tasted like the land they came from. Over time, as refined sugar became cheap and store-bought pies took over, souffle pie disappeared from most homes. It was too regional, too old-fashioned, too simple to compete with newer holiday desserts, but the people who remember it still talk about it with a quiet pride. It was a dessert that told a story, and every slice tasted a little like history. Number 15. Coffee soup over crumbled biscuit. Here is the part of the list where some of you are about to think I am making it up. I am not. Coffee soup was a real dessert, eaten in real kitchens across the southern mountains for 3 generations, and for many older Appalachian people, it is still the taste that means home. A cold leftover biscuit, a bowl, a pour of hot coffee, thinned with warm milk from the cow, sweetened with a heaped teaspoon of sugar, or a thick drizzle of sorghum. A grown man ate it at the end of the evening meal. A child was given a small cup of it before bed on a cold winter night. Here is what I want you to see, and this is the thing most modern people miss. Coffee soup was not a joke, and it was not a hardship trick. It was a comfort. A bitter grown-up drink, softened with milk and sugar, poured over the last piece of something their mother had baked that morning. An old man in Letcher County, interviewed for a Foxfire oral history in 1977, said he ate coffee soup 4 times a week for 60 years. He never once thought of it as poor. He thought of it as his. These small, strange desserts were the taste of a specific life. They were not reminders that a family had little. They were reminders that a family had each other at a table, at the end of a hard day, with a warm cup and a piece of bread. That is the whole sermon of hillbilly sweet-making, and you will find it under every item on this list if you look close enough. Okay, so this next one was a staple on Grandma's dinner table during the holidays. Yeah, I'm talking about the spice cake. Come on, there's no way you don't remember this bad boy. Spice cake had been a beloved dessert for centuries, with origins tracing back to medieval Europe. The use of spices like cinnamon, nutmeg, and cloves in cakes became popular during the 18th and 19th centuries after these ingredients were brought to America. Someone's grandma decided to add spices to an old-fashioned cake batter, and let's just say we're extremely grateful for it. This cake shaped many childhoods as its aroma marked the start of fall and holiday season. From Thanksgiving days to Christmas mornings, this one was always sitting in the kitchen for anyone who wanted a taste of the season. Number 12. Blueberry buckle. A single-layer cake with blueberries folded into the batter and a crumb topping that buckled and cracked as it baked. Butter, sugar, flour, an egg, milk, and a pint of fresh blueberries. The crumb topping was just more butter, sugar, flour, and cinnamon rubbed together with your fingers until it looked like wet sand. You spread it over the batter, and the whole thing went into the oven. When it came out, the topping had broken into jagged golden pieces pressed into the surface of the cake. It was not pretty. It looked like a mistake, but it tasted like a blueberry donut crossed with a coffee cake, and it was ready in under an hour with no special equipment. A 9x13 pan and a mixing bowl. That was it. Hummingbird cake was once a Thanksgiving showstopper, a towering southern dessert packed with banana, pineapple, and toasted nuts that made the whole room go quiet with the first slice. It tasted like sunshine and warmth even on the coldest holiday morning. Families made it because it felt generous, full of ingredients you saved for special occasions. The batter was thick and fragrant, spiced just enough to feel festive, and the cream cheese frosting wrapped everything in a soft, tangy sweetness. Every layer tasted like celebration. For years, it stood proudly among pies on Thanksgiving buffets, especially in the Deep South, where hospitality meant feeding people with your best over time, though it slipped into birthday parties and spring gatherings instead, pushed aside by pumpkin pies and chocolate desserts that dominated holiday tables. But those who grew up with hummingbird cake remember the joy of cutting into it, the way the fruit kept it moist for days, and how it felt like the dessert that understood the holiday best, abundant, warm, and made to share. A sweet memory worth keeping alive. Red velvet cake emerged as a Christmas showstopper during the 1950s, its dramatic crimson layers making it perfect for holiday tables. The original color came from the reaction between cocoa and acidic buttermilk, producing a subtle reddish hue that bakers enhanced with beet juice or red food coloring. The texture was unlike any other cake, tender, fine-crumbed, and slightly tangy from the buttermilk and vinegar in the batter. Cream cheese frosting became the traditional accompaniment, its tang perfectly balancing the cake's subtle chocolate flavor. The Waldorf Astoria Hotel helped popularize the recipe, and soon home bakers everywhere were attempting their own versions. Slicing into a red velvet cake was always dramatic, the vivid red interior contrasting beautifully with white frosting. Mothers saved this cake for Christmas Day dinner, knowing its appearance alone would impress guests. The combination of chocolate, buttermilk, and cream cheese created something utterly distinctive that defined mid-century holiday elegance. When the Rolling Stones toured America in 1972, the tequila sunrise was the drink on the rider, and by the following summer, every bar from Los Angeles to Atlanta was mixing one. The cocktail, tequila, orange juice, grenadine sinking slowly through the glass to pool at the bottom like a sunset, was too photogenic to stay a drink. Home bakers poured it into a bundt pan. Yellow cake mix went in with orange juice and a generous measure of tequila. Then grenadine was layered into the batter at the last moment so it would streak the crumb red and orange as it baked. The glaze on top was more orange juice and more tequila, poured on while the cake was still warm so it soaked straight through. At a 1973 dinner party, arriving with a tequila sunrise cake on a pedestal plate meant you had seen the concert, or at least knew someone who had. The cocktail aged out of fashion before the decade ended. The cake was never sophisticated enough to outlast it. Nesselrode pie was the glamorous frozen dessert that graced holiday tables from the 1940s through the 1970s, a Baroque confection of chestnut cream, candied fruits, and maraschino cherries frozen in a crumb crust. Named after a Russian diplomat, it became fashionable in American restaurants before home cooks adapted it for Christmas entertaining. Making it required cooking chestnuts until soft, pressing them through a sieve, folding the puree into whipped cream along with rum-soaked fruits. The mixture was poured into a graham cracker crust and frozen until firm, then topped with more whipped cream and candied fruit. The flavor was sophisticated and unusual, the chestnuts providing earthy sweetness unlike any other dessert. Department store restaurants made Nesselrode pie famous, and home cooks struggled to replicate its elegance. The dessert disappeared as chestnuts became harder to find and frozen desserts fell from fashion. Today, few remember this once celebrated creation that represented holiday entertaining at its most refined. Remember how we just talked about the way desserts and salads were getting cozy with each other? The lines were only getting blurrier as the years kept on coming and didn't stop, and orange gelatin pretzel salads proved that point while also being another example of the orange movement that was sweeping up home cooking. This dessert salad had its heyday in the 1980s, particularly in the Midwest, and the key to it was the pretzel crust and orange gelatin. These salads were really easy to prepare, which kept in line with the trends that the nation was heading to. The Joys of Jell-O was a community cookbook that featured the dish in the 1970s because it was really popular in most posh neighborhoods. Tiramisu is a bit of a weird thing. There's never been an overwhelming love for it in the 20th century, but there's been a swarm of tiramisu lovers in the late 2000s, especially thanks to the internet, because it's a dish that really shows off your cooking skills. It's an Italian dish that came in the 1980s and 1990s. Chocolate beet cake was another creative way to sneak veggies and add a bit of nutrition to a chocolate cake. Beets added natural sweetness and moisture, creating a dense and flavorful cake. And don't even get me started on the beautiful red hue it added to the batter. The history of chocolate beet cake is often linked to wartime periods, particularly World War II, when food rationing was common. Yep, this cake came all the way from Europe and was very popular around the time when beetroot was abundant. This cake is proof that cake can be healthy too. All you need to do is add beet to it. Now, this cake began to disappear as soon as people caught on to the secret vegetable in it. Yeah, the taste must be delicious, but chocolate and beet don't really sound appetizing together, do they? However, this one survived the war, and that has got to mean something. We shouldn't let it slip by this easily. Wacky cake is also known as depression cake because it came about when stuff like eggs and milk were hard to come by. It's vegan by accident, using vinegar and baking soda to make it rise instead of eggs. This cake is all about being deliciously simple and affordable, mixing everything right in the baking pan, which means less mess too. Although it was a big deal back when fancy ingredients were scarce, it's not the showstopper it once was with all the fancy desserts out there now. Still, it remains a popular choice in vegan and eco-conscious communities for its minimal environmental impact and allergen-free ingredients. You usually just sprinkle some powdered sugar on top, and it's good to go. The moist, rich chocolate taste makes it hard to believe it's made without any dairy or eggs. It's just a smart, tasty solution when you're short on supplies. Next on our retro dessert journey is the surprising tomato soup cake. I know what you're thinking, tomato soup and cake. That's exactly why it made the list. The ingredients read like a standard spice cake: flour, sugar, eggs, butter, raisins, cinnamon, nutmeg, and cloves. But the addition of tomato soup lends moisture and a subtle tang. If you want to recreate this, you mix the wet and dry ingredients separately, combine them, and bake until a toothpick comes out clean. Tomato cake soup originated during the Great Depression and saw a revival in the 70s due to its quirky charm. It was one of those weird recipes in family cookbooks. Did your family ever bake this cake? While it's a testament to home cooks' creativity and resilience, tomato soup cake is a quirky piece of food history that some might still find delicious today, but many are happy to leave in the past. If you still remember, a while ago I mentioned how much love canned fruits had been receiving both as a concept and a practical part of everyday life. They even became something of a lifeline during the Depression because they were some of the most popularly distributed items you could get from government relief efforts or organizations. As a result, people started making dishes that made full use of all kinds of salads. Things like frozen fruit salads used all the canned fruits available, usually pineapples, oranges, cherries, or something like bananas, and then mixed them with mayonnaise or cream, eventually freezing them in molds in the final step. If available, a bit of sugar and marshmallow was also used for extra sweetness, but I wouldn't rely on most homes to have marshmallows back then. Anyway, this was a cheap and easy salad you could prepare in bulk that also gave the family a shot of some much-needed nutrition. Velvet cake emerged as a Christmas showstopper during the 1950s, its dramatic crimson layers making it perfect for holiday tables. The original color came from the reaction between cocoa and acidic buttermilk, producing a subtle reddish hue that bakers enhanced with beet juice or red food coloring. The texture was unlike any other cake: tender, fine crumbed, and slightly tangy from the buttermilk and vinegar in the batter. Cream cheese frosting became the traditional accompaniment, its tang perfectly balancing the cake's subtle chocolate flavor. The Waldorf Astoria Hotel helped popularize the recipe, and soon home bakers everywhere were attempting their own versions. Slicing into a red velvet cake was always dramatic, the vivid red interior contrasting beautifully with white frosting. Mothers saved this cake for Christmas Day dinner, knowing its appearance alone would impress guests. The combination of chocolate, buttermilk, and cream cheese created something utterly distinctive that defined mid-century holiday elegance. Grape hull pie was a hidden southern treasure, made from muscadine grapes that grew thick on backyard vines and roadside fences. Families who knew this pie understood the work behind it, separating the tough skins from the pulp, simmering the insides until soft, chopping the hulls, then marrying everything back together with sugar and spice. The result was a filling with a deep purple color and a flavor both tart and sweet, richer than any store-bought fruit could ever give. This pie showed up on Thanksgiving tables in rural communities where ingredients came from the land and every harvest was celebrated. It tasted like home, like the sun-baked vines children grew up running past, like the work of hands that valued nothing more than using what you had. But as people moved away from the countryside and muscadine stopped appearing in local markets, grape hull pie nearly vanished. Few recipes survived, passed down only in small handwritten notes tucked inside old cookbooks. A dessert almost forgotten, but unforgettable to anyone lucky enough to have tasted it. Number 14, hickory nut cake. The hickory tree is a stingy tree. The nuts are small, the shell is thick, the meat inside is the size of a baby's fingernail. To fill a single cup, you sit on a porch in November with a hammer and a flat rock and you work for an hour. A grandmother in Watauga County, North Carolina, put her grandchildren to the job every fall. Each child got a penny a cup. It took a whole Saturday to earn a nickel. The cake was worth it. 2 layers, butter, sugar, milk, eggs, flour, and 2 cups of hickory meat stirred through the batter at the very end. A boiled white icing over the top. The flavor is delicate, slightly smoky, nothing like a pecan. There are fewer than a dozen places in America where you can still buy a slice of real hickory nut cake. Most of them are within 80 miles of the ridge where Ella May was born. I think it's fair to say that apples were a crucial part of whipping up desserts back in the day. But hey, apple pie wasn't the only sweet treat we got out of this fruit. Remember Grandma's apple dumplings? These were made by wrapping a whole or sliced apple in dough and then baking it until golden brown. And Grandma's apple syrup topping was like cherry on top. This was a labor-intensive dessert, which is pretty much why it's associated with Grandma's kitchen. The process of peeling, coring, and stuffing the apples and then carefully wrapping them in dough was a true labor of love. This one was commonly enjoyed as a dessert, but no one judged you if you ate it as breakfast. I mean, pair it with a cup of coffee and your taste buds will thank you. 14. Chess pie. Nobody agrees on where the name came from. Some people say it is a corruption of cheese pie, from an Old English custard that was stored in a chest. Some say it is just pie, and when somebody asked what kind, the woman who baked it said it is just pie and the word got shortened. The recipe is so simple it sounds like a mistake. Sugar, butter, eggs, a splash of vinegar or buttermilk, a teaspoon of cornmeal, and a single pie crust. You mixed everything together, poured it into the shell, and baked it until the top cracked and turned golden brown. The filling set up into something between a custard and a candy. Dense, impossibly sweet, almost translucent at the edges where the butter pooled against the crust. Chess pie showed up at every 4th of July gathering south of the Mason-Dixon line because it required nothing that would spoil in the heat. No cream, no fresh fruit, no custard that needed refrigeration. A woman could bake it at 6 in the morning and it would still be perfect 12 hours later sitting on a picnic table in full sun. That durability was its genius. It traveled in the back of a truck. It survived paper plates and plastic forks and children who dropped their slice in the grass and picked it up and ate it anyway. Chess pie was proof that a dessert did not need decoration to earn its place. No lattice, no meringue, no powdered sugar on top, just a plain brown disc in a plain white crust that tasted like somebody had figured out how to bake butter into a solid. Bakeries stopped carrying it when lemon meringue and French silk took over the display case. But the women who grew up making chess pie never switched. They baked it until they could not stand at the counter anymore. There is a reason these desserts vanished, and it was not because people stopped wanting them. The freezer aisle killed them. Sara Lee, Mrs. Smith's, Pepperidge Farm. By the 1970s, you could buy a frozen pie that looked close enough and tasted close enough, and nobody had to stand over a stove for 3 hours in July heat. The trade was invisible at first. One year, the cobbler was homemade. The next year, it came from a box, and nobody said anything because the woman who brought it was 73 and tired. Within a decade, the dessert table went from 15 homemade dishes to 4, and the rest were store-bought in their original packaging with the price sticker still on the lid. Nobody chose convenience over craft. They just ran out of women willing to do the work for free. Coconut cake reigned supreme as the most requested Christmas dessert across the American South, its snowy white layers and generous coating of fresh coconut making it look like winter itself. The cake required cracking and shredding fresh coconuts by hand, a task producing incomparably sweet, moist shreds, nothing like the dried packaged variety. 3 or 4 tender white layers were stacked with cooked 7-minute frosting that billowed like clouds, then covered completely with fresh coconut. The coconut had to be applied while frosting was still tacky, pressed gently into every surface until the cake resembled a snowball. Some bakers poked holes in layers and drizzled fresh coconut milk over them for extra moisture. The finished cake was displayed on the most elegant cake stand the household owned, often on a silver pedestal reserved only for Christmas. Children would sneak pinches of sweet coconut from the sides when adults were not looking. Today's coconut cakes rarely approach this level of devotion. Nobody called it prune cake at the table. That was the first rule. You said spice cake, or you said grandma's cake, or you said nothing, and let the dense, dark, intensely moist crumb speak for itself. The recipe had been in print since the 1930s, when home economists promoted prunes as a Depression-era moisture source and natural sweetener for spice cakes that needed to stretch further than their ingredients suggested. A cup of stewed prunes or prune puree went into the batter alongside cinnamon, allspice, and nutmeg, and the result was a cake so moist it held for days without drying. The finishing touch was the boiled buttermilk glaze. Butter, buttermilk, sugar, and baking soda cooked together until foamy, then poured directly over the hot cake still in the pan, where it soaked in completely and left a barely there crust on the surface. Prune companies ran their own versions of the recipe in magazine advertisements through the 1950s and 60s. She made hers from a card written in her own hand. When you find a prune cake recipe in an old box, you have found someone's grandmother. Stollen was that dense, fruit-studded German bread that appeared wrapped in foil on Christmas morning, its butter-rich dough concealing a tunnel of marzipan running through its center. Making authentic Stollen required starting weeks ahead, soaking dried fruits in rum until they plumped with boozy sweetness. The yeast dough was rich with butter and eggs, folded around candied citrus, almonds, and the precious marzipan log before being shaped into its distinctive oval. After baking, the Stollen was brushed with melted butter and buried under drifts of powdered sugar that created its characteristic white appearance. Traditional families made several loaves, wrapping them tightly and allowing them to age for weeks. Each slice revealed the spiral of marzipan surrounded by jeweled fruit, the texture somewhere between bread and cake. German bakeries in cities sold authentic Stollen at premium prices, while home bakers attempted their own versions. The time and technique required kept Stollen rare, a true Christmas luxury. A lot of the dishes so far reflect food trends of the post-World War II era, where America was kind of revamping its identity as far as food was concerned. Orange Spritz cookies were a part of a new wave of orange craze that took over the nation. Though the fruit hadn't gotten much love outside of juice before, suddenly everyone and their grandmother were making batches of orange desserts, like Spritz cookies. The reason these got pretty popular was through immigrant communities, which you can really credit a lot of food that's popular in America to. The orange zest was key here. It gave it that citrusy identity that the cookies were so known for. Recipes for these were all over Betty Crocker and Better Homes and Gardens cookbooks, and they were the joy of grandmas everywhere, especially since home-based cooking was taking off so well in the 1950s to 1970s era. If you love a good brownie, you would love the chocolate cream cheese brownies, which took everyone's favorite treat to the next level. Imagine rich, fudgy chocolate brownie batter swirled with creamy cheesecake filling. The origin of these brownies is somewhat disputed, but most culinary historians agree that brownies were first created in the United States in the late 19th century. This two-in-one dessert was a staple at bake sales, parties, or even a simple treat at home. You know those days when you can't decide between a brownie or a cheesecake? Well, the chocolate cream cheese brownie was your answer. Some variations include adding additional flavors like raspberry, pumpkin, or caramel to the cream cheese layer. Others contain different types of chocolate, such as white chocolate or dark chocolate. So why did this one leave us so soon? Some things are just not meant to stay forever, and the chocolate cream cheese brownie was one of them. Prune cake was once a beloved Christmas tradition that has fallen victim to unfair modern prejudices against this misunderstood dried fruit. The prunes were stewed until tender, then pureed and folded into a spiced batter that produced one of the moistest cakes imaginable. Cinnamon, nutmeg, allspice, and cloves perfumed the cake with the warm scent of the holiday season. The prunes gave the cake a deep, complex sweetness that was richer than sugar alone could provide, along with a dense, satisfying texture. Buttermilk caramel frosting was the traditional pairing, its burnt sugar notes echoing the caramelized flavors of the dried fruit. Grandmothers who grew up during the Depression knew prunes as nutritious, affordable, and delicious, not something to be embarrassed about. The cakes kept beautifully for days, actually improving as the flavors melded together. Today's bakers might rebrand it as dried plum cake, but those who remember the original know no renaming could improve upon perfection. Bourbon balls always sat quietly in a tin tucked toward the back of the holiday table, waiting for the adults to give each other a knowing smile before lifting the lid. These were not for children. They were made from crushed cookies, powdered sugar, cocoa, chopped nuts, and just enough bourbon to warm the throat without overpowering the sweetness. Families loved them because they required no baking at all, just rolling, chilling, and hiding from curious hands. At Thanksgiving gatherings, they were shared like a secret, passed from adults to adults, each one a small burst of chocolate and holiday spirit. But as tastes changed and more homes embraced alcohol-free celebrations, bourbon balls drifted into the background. Some still make them at Christmas, but few remember they once appeared proudly at Thanksgiving too. Those who do recall the laughter, the soft clink of tins closing, and the rich flavor that signaled the start of the season. A tiny dessert with a big personality. Coconut bonbons were those snow-white confections appearing in Christmas candy assortments, their creamy centers encased in shredded coconut that made them look like tiny snowballs. The centers were made from sweetened condensed milk mixed with powdered sugar and butter, flavored with vanilla or almond extract, then chilled until firm enough to shape. Each ball was rolled in flaked coconut, sometimes toasted for extra flavor, creating textural contrast between smooth interior and chewy exterior. Some families dipped bonbons in chocolate before the coconut coating, creating striped interiors when sliced. The candy was simple enough for children to help make, their small hands rolling sticky centers while adults managed the coating. Coconut bonbons kept well in refrigerators, making them ideal when candy dishes needed constant refilling. The flavor was pure, sweet comfort. Nothing sophisticated, just honest pleasure of coconut and cream. They've been replaced by commercial coconut candies that lack homemade tenderness. Sugar cream pie was known as desperation pie, and it was really beloved during the Depression in the Midwest, specifically in places like Indiana, where the effects of the recession had hit particularly hard, and where, as a result, even the most basic baking ingredients became pretty hard to come by. Instead of flour, people used cornstarch as a thickener, and all you need then is sugar and mock-whipped cream, or if you can afford it, the real thing. That just leaves the pie crust and you're honestly good to go. You didn't need to worry about this dish racking up the bill either, at least the electrical one. You could cook this pie on a stovetop and it was really satisfying, but it was made with the absolute bare minimum, so it caught the name desperation pie, hinting at how badly people just wanted to go back to their old way of life where they could have apple pies almost whenever they wanted. I suppose the most expensive ingredient in this dish is probably vanilla, but that was really hard to get. When typical middle-class families on the lower end of the spectrum did get it, though, they would often save it for some of the holiday season or for when spirits in the family were really low and they needed a kick to restore some life into them. As far as flavor and texture go, it's actually a knockout for the cost and effort. It tastes a lot better than you would expect, and I think it could even last in today's world if you wanted to save your budget a little. Number 13. Corncob jelly on a cold biscuit. Here is another one that will surprise you. After supper in September, a hillbilly woman did not throw her corn cobs to the hogs. Not yet. She boiled 6 cobs in a pot of water for a full hour, strained out a pale amber liquid that smelled faintly of corn silk, added sugar and a box of powdered pectin, and poured it into jelly jars. Corn cob jelly, mock honey. Poor woman's gold. It tasted, people said, very close to real honey, though honey was $3 a jar at the store and corncob jelly cost nothing but time. Spread thick on a cold split biscuit, warmed briefly on the stovetop, it was a real dessert at breakfast. A family in Pike County, Kentucky, put up 40 pints of corncob jelly every fall in 1953. They ate the last jar in May. Not one of the 8 children ever knew they were eating cobs. You and I both know this list would be incomplete without the mention of classic whoopie pies. Now, these come with an interesting origin story. Whoopie pies are believed to have originated in the northeastern United States, particularly in Pennsylvania Dutch country, or Maine. According to legend, when Amish women would bake these treats, their husbands or children would exclaim, "Whoopie!" upon finding them in their lunch pails. And let's be honest, we all did that little whoopie when we sighted this one in our grandma's fridge. So these were a perfect cross between a cake and a cookie. But despite their name, they were more like mini cakes than actual pies. These were the best on-the-go treats that you could just grab on your way out. Also, here's a fun fact. In 2011, the whoopie pie was named the official state treat of Maine. Number 16, Lady Baltimore Cake. A white layer cake filled with a cooked frosting loaded with raisins, pecans, and dried figs. The cake itself was delicate, made with egg whites only, no yolks. The filling was where everything happened. You boiled sugar into a syrup, beat it into the egg whites, and then folded in the fruit and nuts. The origin traces back to a tea room in Charleston, South Carolina, sometime around 1906. A novelist named Owen Wister ate a slice, put it in a book, and the name stuck. By the 1950s, Lady Baltimore Cake was a 4th of July staple from the Carolinas to Georgia. It took an entire morning to make, and the layers were thin and easy to crack. But when it held together, it was the most elegant thing on the dessert table, and everyone knew exactly who made it. Sorghum cake drew its distinctive character from the thick, dark syrup that once sweetened tables across the rural South and Midwest. Before refined sugar became affordable, sorghum molasses was the sweetener of choice, produced by pressing juice from sorghum cane and cooking it down to syrupy thickness. The resulting cakes had deep, complex sweetness with notes of caramel, smoke, and something almost metallic that refined sugar could never provide. Spices like ginger, cinnamon, and cloves were essential partners, their warmth balancing sorghum's intensity. The batter was often made with buttermilk, which reacted with acidic sorghum to create tender crumb. Farm families treasured their sorghum sources, often trading with neighbors who operated small mills each autumn. Christmas cakes made with sorghum connected families to agricultural heritage. Though sorghum syrup can still be found, the cakes it sweetened have largely disappeared. The fondue pot lived in a cabinet between dinner parties, still in its original box, and bringing it out was a declaration that the evening was an event. The chocolate fondue itself was straightforward: semi-sweet chocolate, heavy cream, a splash of Kirsch or Grand Marnier, melted over a small flame until smooth enough to coat a strawberry cleanly. The social mechanics were the real technique. Everyone dipped in turns. The long, two-tined fork with the colored ring that marked which was yours, the strawberries and pound cake cubes arranged on the serving platter, the rule that dropping your dipper meant a kiss or a drink depending on the company. Swiss-French communal tradition, revived in America in the 1950s, reached peak saturation in American dinner culture through the 1970s, before fondue pots disappeared into thrift stores by the thousands. The chocolate still works exactly the same way. It is the gathering around it that cannot be replicated. Log cake was the showpiece of Christmas desserts, a chocolate sponge rolled around cream filling and decorated to resemble a bark-covered log complete with meringue mushrooms and marzipan holly. French in origin, the bûche de Noël became an American tradition during the mid-20th century, when elegant entertaining reached its peak. Making one required rolling warm sponge cake without cracking it, a technique demanding practice and confidence. The cake was spread with buttercream or whipped cream, rolled tightly, then frosted with chocolate dragged with a fork to simulate bark. Decorators added knots and branch stubs, dusted everything with powdered sugar snow, and arranged tiny meringue mushrooms. The presentation was theatrical, carried to the table whole, then sliced to reveal the spiral inside. Bakeries charged premium prices for Yule logs, but ambitious home bakers tackled them as Christmas Eve projects. The cake combined artistry with flavor in ways modern desserts rarely attempt. And one version of it, tiramisu Yule log cake, got really popular as a part of holiday baking. By now, America was moving pretty far away from dishes like this, though. The emphasis in the post-World War II era was on things like convenience food, thanks to a rise in TV culture. People were also really focusing on experimental dishes that combined foreign influences with American classics. That can kind of explain the birth of the tiramisu Yule log cake, since the Yule log cake itself is a European classic. Cookbooks that really focused on holiday cooking, like Martha Stewart's Christmas or Test Kitchen's Holiday Baking, featured this version of the dish, which made a lot of use of creamy mascarpone and coffee. Christmas jelly slices were something that were short-lived but thoroughly enjoyed. They started off in the 50s as a part of all the Jell-O promotional cookbooks you'd see at the time. You didn't think Jell-O just became an overnight or organic success, did you? While people really did, it didn't take over the taste buds of the country on its own. All kinds of dishes were shoved in cookbooks to show all the things you could do with jelly, and the Christmas jelly slice was one of them. As the name suggests, it got attached to Christmas for the colors it had, red, green, and white, as well as for having a custard filling that really did well with other Christmas menus. Potatoes in a cake? Believe it or not, chocolate potato cake was a thing, and it was delicious. The mashed potatoes added incredible moisture and texture to the cake, which made it wonderfully soft and rich. And before you start wondering, no, the potatoes didn't affect the taste, they just made the cake better. The chocolate potato cake first came into existence in the 1930s and became famous in parts of the United States and Ireland. This was a popular dessert in times when people had to make do with what they had, and it became an instant hit. Potatoes were common, cheap, and available at all times. It was a great way to use leftover mashed potatoes or sneak some veggies into a dessert, as long as you don't tell the kids. If you're ever bored and craving a crazy treat, you know what to make. Snowball cakes are all about that winter vibe, with their fluffy marshmallow filling and a coating of shredded coconut that looks just like snow. Inside, there's a chocolate sponge cake that keeps everything rich and interesting. These treats got their name from their cool, snowball-like appearance, making them a hit during the holiday season. They used to be all over the place as pre-packaged snacks from brands like Hostess, known for their fun and distinctive look. But as people started choosing more natural and less processed options, snowball cakes kind of faded out. They were usually wrapped up all neat, making them easy to grab and go. Next is a hot dog and marshmallow casserole. Okay, combining hot dogs and marshmallows in a dessert was as bad as it sounds. This casserole was made with sliced hot dogs, mini marshmallows, canned pineapple chunks, and a sweet glaze made from brown sugar and mustard. The oddly sweet and savory concoction was layered and baked until everything melded together. The dessert likely emerged during the 70s era of experimental recipes. Most families that served these got side eyes. Despite the novelty, this dish was more a conversation piece than a delight. How many of you would dare serve this today? Thankfully, hot dog and marshmallow casserole is an experiment that now belongs to the past. Mimi's tomato soup cake was an odd one. It used canned stuff like Campbell's tomato soup, which was thriving in the Depression since that whole period really helped put canned products on the map. It also used other things like replacing dairy in the recipe with other substitutes. Despite what you might think, it actually tasted nothing like tomato soup. It was more along the lines of a spice cake, and if I were to make you imagine the flavors, I'd say a good place to start is to picture a mix of cinnamon, nutmeg, and cloves kind of overtaking the general flavor, but having a dense and impactful kick in their aftertaste. You'd be surprised how many relief organizations like the Red Cross distributed this around too, though I'm still not really sure who Mimi was supposed to be. Coconut cake reigned supreme as the most requested Christmas dessert across the American South, its snowy white layers and generous coating of fresh coconut making it look like winter itself. The cake required cracking and shredding fresh coconuts by hand, a task producing incomparably sweet, moist shreds, nothing like the dried packaged variety. 3 or 4 tender white layers were stacked with cooked 7-minute frosting that billowed like clouds, then covered completely with fresh coconut. The coconut had to be applied while frosting was still tacky, pressed gently into every surface until the cake resembled a snowball. Some bakers poked holes in layers and drizzled fresh coconut milk over them for extra moisture. The finished cake was displayed on the most elegant cake stand the household owned, often on a silver pedestal reserved only for Christmas. Children would sneak pinches of sweet coconut from the sides when adults were not looking. Today's coconut cakes rarely approach this level of devotion. Coconut custard pie was the quiet heartbeat of Southern holiday tables, a dessert that won people over without needing decoration or fuss. It came from the simplest ingredients: eggs, milk, sugar, shredded coconut, and vanilla. As it baked, the custard settled low while the coconut rose and turned golden, creating a pie that tasted warm and familiar. Families loved it because it brought sunshine to a cold season and reminded them of childhood afternoons. It showed up at potlucks and Thanksgiving dinners long before more elaborate desserts became popular. Older cooks trusted it because it never failed, even in lean years. But as store-bought pies and trendier flavors crowded the table, this humble favorite faded. People forgot how satisfying a soft custard and toasted coconut could be. Still, in homes where old recipes survive, this pie remains a gentle reminder of slower holidays and simple comfort. Number 12. Sour cream raisin pie. This pie is what you made in February, after the cow had calved and the milk was coming rich, and you had a crock of cultured sour cream on the cold shelf of the spring house. A cup of that sour cream, a cup of sugar, 2 beaten egg yolks, a heaped cup of dark raisins, a scraping of nutmeg, a crust underneath, a pale meringue piled on top made from the 2 whites. Baked slow. The raisins plumped. The custard thickened. The meringue took a soft tan on its peaks. A woman in Breathitt County, Kentucky, wrote in her kitchen book in 1961 that this pie was worth the reputation her mother-in-law never gave her. Hillbilly women kept score in pies. The good ones knew. So, blondies are the butterscotch-flavored cousins of brownies and are also often called blonde brownies. Surprisingly, blondies actually predate brownies. Recipes for molasses-flavored bar cookies, which are considered early versions of blondies, appeared in cookbooks as far back as the late 19th century, before the more famous chocolate brownie took the spotlight. Grandmas often baked these when they wanted a break from chocolate treats. While brownies may have overshadowed blondies for a while, blondies have been making a comeback in recent years. They've become a trendy dessert at cafes and bakeries, where they're often topped off with gourmet ingredients like toffee bits, browned butter, or even matcha. Number 15. Divinity candy, sugar, corn syrup, and egg whites beaten into a cloud. You boiled the sugar mixture to hardball stage, poured it over stiffly beaten whites, and kept beating until the candy lost its gloss and held a peak when you dropped it from a spoon. Humidity was the enemy. If you tried to make divinity on a muggy July afternoon, it would never set. It would sit on the wax paper like a puddle, and then you threw the whole batch away. Women checked the weather before they started. A dry day meant divinity. A humid day meant fudge instead. You dropped it in spoonfuls onto wax paper and let it cool. Each piece was light as a cotton ball and sweet enough to make your teeth ring. Black walnut cake showcased one of America's most distinctive native nuts, with a flavor so intense it divided families into passionate admirers and determined avoiders. Black walnuts grew wild across the eastern United States, and gathering them each fall was a messy, labor-intensive process that stained hands for weeks. The nuts had a bold, almost wine-like flavor with hints of smoke and earth that English walnuts could never match. Bakers folded them generously into butter cake batter and pressed them into caramel or cream cheese frosting. The strong flavor meant a little went far, but true devotees packed their cakes with as many nuts as the batter could hold. Rural families who gathered their own black walnuts considered them precious, using them only for special occasions like Christmas. The cakes were dense and richly flavored, perfect for slicing thin and savoring slowly. Though black walnuts can still be found, the labor of gathering and shelling them has made this cake increasingly rare. In the 1970s, Robert Redford was the most attractive man in American cinema, and some home cook decided the most indulgent dessert she could build deserved to be named for him, or to outdo him entirely. The Robert Redford cake, also known as the better-than-sex cake, depending on who was writing the recipe card, was a 4-layer refrigerator dessert assembled cold in a 9x13. Crushed pecans mixed with flour and butter, pressed flat and baked just until golden. Cream cheese beaten with powdered sugar and folded into Cool Whip until it held a firm ridge. Chocolate instant pudding made with cold milk. A final layer of Cool Whip spread perfectly smooth. 3 hours in the refrigerator before it could be cut. It was a staple of church potlucks and neighborhood gatherings from Ohio to the Carolina coast through the late 1970s and into the 1980s. She always brought it to the 4th of July. After she stopped coming to the 4th of July, nobody thought to bring it. The recipe card is somewhere. The exact ratio of cream cheese to Cool Whip is not. Lebkuchen were those soft, spiced German cookies that arrived in decorative tins each Christmas. Their tops glazed white and their bottoms covered in edible paper called Oblaten. Unlike hard gingerbread, Lebkuchen were meant to be chewy and moist, dense with honey, almonds, and a complex blend of spices that included cardamom, coriander, and anise. German bakeries had perfected these cookies over centuries, and immigrant families brought recipes to America, where Lebkuchen became Christmas traditions in communities from Wisconsin to Texas. The dough was made weeks in advance, stored in crocks to ripen before being cut and baked. The characteristic glaze was made from powdered sugar and water, painted on while cookies were still warm so it dried to a crackled finish. Families would order tins from German specialty shops or make their own following handwritten recipes. Lebkuchen kept for months when stored properly, improving with age as the spices mellowed into harmony. Towards the tail end of the 20th century, holiday baking in general had taken off in an entirely new direction because people had a lot more to work with since the makeup of cooking and food in America was actively changing. An example is truffles, which are typically a pretty European dish that didn't ever have as much traction as they did in the 1980s-2000s period. People started making stuff like white Christmas truffles, which used white chocolate and mixed it with dried fruit to give a new twist on the dish. It was even popular for the grandmas of today, since the Sweet Book of Candy Making, a do-it-yourself gift-giving book, featured the dish. All kinds of gourmet candy cookbooks would give it love, too, since this was a really warm, fuzzy dish that made great use of white chocolate and fruit. Loves a bit of Mars, right? It's one of the best chocolate bars we've ever had. I mean, it definitely beats Toblerone for me, but that's a video for another day. Another reason people really love the bar, besides its obvious elite taste, is that it could be worked into dishes like Mars Bar Christmas crackles pretty easily. You could do a lot of DIY stuff with a few bars of Mars and end up with a pretty solid dessert to show off your ingenuity with. Mars bars were already a favorite in America, so when people took Rice Krispies and melted Mars to make a no-bake Christmas dessert in 1990, it really took off. It was a big part of holiday party menus, and none of them felt complete without it in that time period. It was also found in no-bake sections of cookbooks, and the ones that focused a lot on party food always made a mention of it for Christmas-themed events. You already know grandmas have no chill around the Christmas season, and honestly, they're a lot more liable to just go all out with every ingredient they have rather than take it easy. It becomes a point of pride for some of them, I think, and I can kind of see why. It meant better and newer dishes for us to eat, though. I'm sure all of you can remember the cheesecake craze that dominated the start of the 2000s and how during Christmas you would have variations like the mini Santa cheesecake. If you thought beat in a cake was bizarre, wait till you hear about the chocolate zucchini cake. This cake was a popular way to use up the extra summer squash. This treat originated in the mid-20th century in Florida and made waves around the world. So how did we even reach the point of adding zucchini to the cake? Well, the story starts with a bored garden owner with chocolate cake batter and a whole lot of zucchini. You know what happens when people get bored? You mix everything in sight, and this accident resulted in a dessert that made our childhoods memorable. It was a staple in cookbooks in the 1980s, but slowly started to fade away in the 2000s. You can't find this one in bakeries, but hey, it's never too late to dust off your grandma's cookbooks, is it? Neapolitan ice cream sandwiches throw together classic flavors: vanilla, chocolate, and strawberry ice cream, squeezed between cookies or wafers. This treat took the old-school Neapolitan ice cream idea from Italy, where mixing up flavors was the thing, and turned it into a fun, easy-to-eat dessert. Having all those flavors in one bite made it super popular at family get-togethers and community events. It was a blast of color and taste that just felt like a party. But as the dessert scene got crowded with new, exotic flavors and gourmet options, these ice cream sandwiches didn't stand out as much. They were simple but effective, with clear layers of ice cream showing through the cookies, making every bite a mix of creamy and crunchy. Number 11. Shoe fly pie. The shoe fly pie crossed into Appalachia from the Pennsylvania Dutch country along the old Route 219, carried down the spine of the mountains by traveling peddlers and German-speaking settlers looking for farmland. By the 1920s, it had quietly become a staple in parts of Preston and Randolph counties in West Virginia. A cup of molasses, a cup of boiling water, a teaspoon of soda, a cup of flour crumbled with butter and brown sugar into sandy crumbs. The molasses went into the unbaked crust. The crumbs went over the top. It baked into a dark, sticky, cake-crumbed wonder of a pie. The name came from the habit of setting the pies out to cool on a porch rail, where flies had to be shooed off the sugar. A whole pie, in 1931, cost a dime to make. It fed a family of 7 with seconds. Here are 100 forgotten desserts from the 1970s we want back. Those were 100 desserts that deserved a place on every kitchen counter in America, and somehow we let them slip away. If your mother or grandmother made one of these, tell us which one it was and how she made it. Drop it in the comments because those recipes belong to all of us. And if you have not already, subscribe so you never miss another trip back to the kitchen that raised you.